The history of One Piece is lying to you. The history of One Piece is lying to you, which sounds dramatic, but is actually the calm version, because the premise of this series is adventure on the grand stage of the world, and the world's own textbook is fan fiction written by the winners. If you think you already kind of get the Void Century because 800 years ago, big war, ancient kingdom loses, world government forms, peace happens, to which I say, that's not a history, that's a corporate mission statement. And to be fair, Oda tells us this straight to our faces. The second you have a 900-year hole in the calendar labeled "Do Not Open," that's not a gap, that's a crime scene. The official timeline is this neat 4-panel infographic. Mysterious ancient kingdom rises, gets too strong, loses to 20. Kings, those kings move to the red line, invent the celestial dragons, form the world government, and then allegedly everything is chill for 8 centuries, except we keep tripping over erased islands, slave races, and planet-sized weapons, like that's normal. Here's an interesting thing: when you line up the actual canon events, the world looks less like one big war than peace, and more like a century-long bar fight that never really ended. We have Joy Boy's failed promise to Fishman Island, the construction of Noah Poseidon's mermaid bloodline, Pluton's blueprints in Water 7, Uranus implied in the sky, and then, 800 years later, Emu casually deleting Lulusia like they're hitting replay on an old weapons test. This isn't a single tragedy. It's a whole failed world system. That's our core thesis. The Void Century wasn't one event. It was an era of overlapping revolutions, prototypes, and rival world orders. And the current world government is just the last faction standing. Not some destined rightful ruler. They didn't win history. They survived it and then edited the footage. They literally burn O'Hara off the map because a bunch of librarians got close to saying one forbidden country name. That's not stability. That's a cover-up with good paperwork. So what are we actually doing in this video? We're going to build a working timeline from the dawn of the world to chapter current map, how the ancient kingdom's tech and ideals echo through the Yonko, through the Revolutionary Army, through weird outliers like Wano and Skype, and show that ancient weapons bloodlines erased islands and gods are all symptoms of one very long, very unfinished war. We're basically doing archaeology with power scaling. I want to emphasize this is a guided reconstruction, not a wild theory. Dump everything we touch will be grounded in canon dates, statements, and Oda's favorite trick of repeating the same historical pattern with different faces. Joy Boy's broken promise as a prototype, Luffy Emu's sky laser on Lulusia as a rehearsal for something older, God Valley as a dress rehearsal for God-era purges, Lunarians, Buccaneers, and Fishmen all systematically erased every time the world tries to reboot. By the time we're done, one of the most recent iconic events in One Piece is going to look a lot less original, because as far as the world is concerned, it's just a shot-for-shot remake of a Void Century incident. Almost beat for beat. We're not ready to name it yet, but once we lay the groundwork, you won't be able to unsee it, how the world government's textbook timeline falls apart. So let's zoom out and do something the world government would absolutely not approve of. Read their own textbook like a crime novel. On paper, the story is beautifully simple. 800 years ago, 20 righteous kings unite against some vague, great enemy, win a glorious war, create the world government, move their bloodlines to Maria Joie as celestial dragons, and then peaceful stability for centuries until Roger says treasure, and everyone collectively loses their minds. That's the kids' menu version of history, and to be fair, Some of it is probably true. There was a massive war. There was a coalition of kings. A global power system that lasts 8 centuries doesn't just pop out of nowhere like Gear 5th fan theories. But here's an interesting thing. In this official narrative, the enemy has no name. The ancient kingdom is not mentioned. The Void Century is literally branded Void, like they just deleted a SOV file and hoped no one would notice. We're told nothing about what the war was actually about, what ideology was defeated, or how power was maintained afterwards. How did 20 equal kings turn into one throne, 5 old men, and a bunch of space nobles in fish bowls? The textbooks kind of shrug. It just worked out. To which I say, if your regime is so righteous, why is the word history basically a slur? Because as far as the canon goes, the lengths they take to erase information are insane. The poneglyphs are indestructible, scattered across the world, written in a dead language, and even then, just reading them is a capital crime. O'Hara doesn't build a weapon, doesn't start a rebellion. They read rocks. The response? Buster call, island erased, survivors hunted. That level of paranoia does not match a clean, heroic victory. That's the behavior of someone sitting on a secret so bad that a single noun, the name of the ancient kingdom, has to be nuked. And this is not a one-time purge 800 years ago. Nolan's story gets rewritten from brilliant explorer who discovered a thriving city to lying clown who made it up because his truth embarrassed a king. God Valley doesn't just get covered up. The island vanishes from maps and memory after a celestial dragon incident. Lulucia gets Thanos snapped off the globe by what looks a lot like Uranus, and the official stance is basically, Lulucia, never heard of her. The pattern is clear. Deletion is an ongoing policy. I want to emphasize how layered this timeline actually is. Common people get the fairy tale version. Marines get a slightly upgraded PDF. Some classified incidents, some redacted names. The Gorosei operate on a third layer, juggling ancient weapons and bloodlines. And then there's Imu, and a handful of relics, poneglyphs, Zunesha, the Sea Kings, who remember the pre-edit world. So our job in the next few sections is to treat the Void Century like a crime scene. We're going to reconstruct what really happened using the blast radius. Ancient weapons, erased islands, outlawed research, extinct races, and suspicious bloodlines. If the official story is the sanitized police report, we're about to go dig in the evidence locker and see which parts still have blood on them. Reconstructing the Void Century, more civil war than fairy tale. So let's start by bullying the simplest version of the story. You've heard this one. Ancient Kingdom versus 20 Kings. Ancient Kingdom loses. World government wins. Roll credits. It's clean. It's easy to meme. And to be fair, it fits on a TikTok infographic. But as far as actual canon goes, that model is way too tidy for what looks like a century-long geopolitical train wreck. Because look at the mess we actually have. Erased islands like God Valley and Lulucia, outlawed archaeology, races scattered and enslaved, a calendar that literally starts after the war, and an invisible monarch sitting on an empty throne. That's not, we beat the bad guys. That's, we nuked the save file and started a new game plus. So we want to reframe the Void Century not as a one-sided stomp, but as a prolonged global civil war that went through 3 ugly phases. Phase 1, the rise and overreach of the ancient kingdom. This is the part the world government really doesn't want you thinking about, because it sounds suspiciously utopian. Joy Boy's apology to the fishmen, the Noah, the promise of a future dawn. These aren't the vibes of a simple warlord. They read like long-term, large-scale integration plans. Different races brought to the surface, borders softened, seas connected. The ancient kingdom feels less like evil empire and more like a radical globalization project that scared the hell out of hereditary monarchies, which leads into Phase 2, the Coalition War. The 20 kings don't just band together because the ancient kingdom has big lasers. They band together because its ideology threatens their entire business model. If your power comes from borders, bloodlines, and divine right, a system that wants to erase those lines is existentially terrifying. And here's an interesting thing. The ancient weapons, Poseidon controlling sea kings, Pluton as a world-shaping warship, Uranus as some sky or orbital thing, we're not looking at 3 random doomsday buttons. We're looking at a distributed world management system that went horribly wrong. I want to emphasize this. If these were just last-second nukes, why do they each govern a different domain? Sea, land, sky. Why is one a bloodline, one a ship, one a mystery interface? It feels like the ancient kingdom built a planetary control panel, and during the Civil War, everyone started mashing buttons. The Red Line, the Calm Belt, Fishman Island stuck under a rock. Those looked like side effects of a system crash, not a clean victory. Which brings us to Phase 3, the cover-up and reformat. The poneglyphs are the giant smoking gun here. People like to treat them as rebel graffiti, to which I say, what kind of graffiti is indestructible, distributed across the globe, and contains engineering instructions? That's not propaganda, that's a backup drive. The ancient kingdom either expected to lose or expected their infrastructure to outlive them, so they shard their knowledge into these stones and trust future readers. The 20 kings build a government on top of that wreckage, freeze the map, lock the calendar at year 0, and pretend the old operating system never existed. But if this was such a clean win, why are they still terrified of a few scholars on O'Hara? Why is Joy Boy framed as a recurring Dawn event instead of a closed chapter? And here's where it gets fun. One modern institution looks suspiciously like a broken, piratified echo of that old balance of power system. The Yonko aren't just random sea emperors. They might be the glitchy remnants of how the ancient kingdom once distributed control across the world's oceans. So next, let's poke at the current 3 great powers and see which parts feel suspiciously familiar. The ancient kingdom. Not a country, a global operating system. So, if the Yonko are the busted remains of an old balance of power system, that raises a bigger question. What kind of world were they balancing in the first place? Because as far as fanbrain goes, we all default to ancient kingdom equals big cool city, maybe a single super island. To which I say, mate, that's Windows 95 thinking in a cloud computing world. I want to emphasize this. Nothing about the canon presentation of the ancient kingdom screams one capital, one flag. The poneglyphs are literally scattered everywhere, from Alabasta to Zoo to the bottom of the sea. That's not how you store secrets if you're a normal country. That's how you build a distributed database. Each stone is a server node, redundantly backing up history, weapon specs, and Joy Boy's weird apology letters. The kingdom starts looking less like a nation-state and more like a global operating system running on stone ideology and terrifyingly advanced tech. Here's an interesting thing. The ancient weapons also don't behave like simple nukes. Poseidon is a bloodline on Fishman Island. Pluton is a ship blueprint tied to Water 7 and Wano's shipbuilding legacy. Uranus is whatever Imu is using to casually delete Lulusia off the map. 3 different regions, 3 different infrastructures, all wired into the same mythos. Joy Boy's promise is specifically to Fishman Island and the Noah, a gigantic ark parked under the red line like it's waiting for a patch update. That smells like region-specific projects. Fishmen get the sea control package. Sky people get the weather and flight DLC. Wano gets shipwright admin tools. And then you look at the D-Clan. These people are everywhere. Nobles like the Nefertari line, pirates like Luffy and Teach, scholars' kids like Robin's mom's friend, random doctors, giants, every race, every region. If this were just a bloodline, the genealogy chart would be a horror manga. It makes way more sense as a cultural or ideological tag. Founders, sympathizers, or root users of the old system embedded in different societies. The will of D is less secret royal DNA and more. I still run the ancient OS in my brain. Sorry about that. Now plug in the Lunarians, Shandians/Skypians, and Fishmen. Lunarians have fire control wings and were literally called gods, living on the red line before the world government. Shandians guard an ancient weapon-adjacent island in the sky and worship the sun god Nika, same iconography that's now tied to Joy Boy. Fishmen have Noah and Poseidon, hardwired into Sea King infrastructure. These aren't random fantasy races. They look like partner races or client states, each hosting a piece of the old network. Sky platforms, climate control, migration ships, maybe even red line maintenance. And to be fair, if you're the 20 kings looking at this global OS that doesn't need monarchs, that's horrifying. The world government doesn't burn every piece of tech. They burn the name. O'Hara gets nuked not because they built Pluton, but because they discovered what the ancient kingdom was called. The symbol and the idea are more dangerous than the hardware, because the hardware is already half buried and repurposed. The ideology, shared stewardship, decentralized control, backed by godlike tools, that's what can reboot the system. So, the crime of the ancient kingdom might not be building weapons. It might be trying to delete kings as a concept. A world where power is automated, load balanced between races and regions, where nobody gets to sit on a literal empty throne for 800 years. And that brings us to the part everyone mislabels, the ancient weapons themselves. If the world was a giant OS, then Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus weren't just doomsday buttons, they were admin tools, which raises the terrifying modern question. If someone stole the admin panel, locked everyone else out, and has been quietly hot-fixing the world for centuries, what exactly happens when a new Joy Boy logs back in? Ancient weapons as world-scale infrastructure, not just nukes. So when we say admin tools were my neat, we usually imagine some nerdy control panel, not 3 mythological nukes divvied up between boat, fish, and sky god. On the surface, the series is screaming at us, these things can end the world. Do not touch. Child lock on. Pluton is hyped as a super warship that can erase islands. Poseidon is literally the mermaid princess who commands sea kings. Uranus is this ominous, probably sky-based thing that the world government just used Lulusia as a test dummy for. That's the shallow read. 3 doomsday buttons spread across the map so no one psychopath can Thanos snap the planet. And to be fair, the story does sell that. Crocodile wants Pluton, the world government panics at the word Poseidon, and Immu casually deleting a country is about as subtle as a buster call to the face. But here's an interesting thing. Look at how they're distributed. Sea creatures, a ship, something in the heavens, undersea, surface, sky. That's not a random grab bag of superweapons. That's literally the three structural layers of the one-piece world. Because as far as world building goes, this planet is weird. You've got a solid wall continent, the red line, slicing the globe, calm belts acting like sea traffic glue, and then entire civilizations just hanging out in clouds. So, what if the ancient weapons aren't weapons first, but the root-level infrastructure that lets you move, mix, or even redraw those layers? Poseidon is the easiest to reframe. Shirahoshi doesn't just yell at sea kings, she coordinates them. We've seen them tow Noah, this absurdly huge ship, like it's a grocery cart. Scale that up, and you're not just saving Fishman Island, you're relocating continents, or at least entire populations, on demand. If you can tell the apex predators of the sea where to go, how hard is it to disrupt or stabilize the calm belts? What happens if sea kings stop clustering around the red line and start treating it like a chew toy instead of a fence? Now take Pluton. Everyone fixates on Island Buster, to which I say that's probably the side effect. This is a ship from a world where the red line might not have been permanent. A mobile fortress with enough power to punch through geological barriers can absolutely erase a city, sure. But the more interesting job is rewriting coastlines. Imagine Pluton as a forced canal maker, a thing built to open and close routes between seas, or even carve a hole straight through the red line so the world's oceans reconnect. Uranus is the vaguest, but the pattern still holds. A sky-based system tied to weather and altitude fits suspiciously well with the mother flame-like blast that erased Lulucha, the existence of sky islands, and the world government's obsession with living above everyone else. If you control storms, air currents, and whatever bizarre physics keeps Skypia afloat, you're not just throwing lightning, you're toggling which parts of the map are habitable. And I want to emphasize how neatly the gatekeeping lines up. Pluton is locked behind blueprints in Water 7, a human engineering lineage. Poseidon is locked behind a bloodline. Every few centuries, a single mermaid princess. Uranus is almost certainly locked to the celestial dragon's domain in the sky, maybe even Emu personally. 3 layers of the world, 3 different access methods, plans, genes, altitude, which loops us back to the real horror question. If the world government hijacked or disabled pieces of this system during the void century, then what we call natural today, the red line, the segregated seas, the lethal weather, might actually be a broken configuration. So, if someone finally restores admin access and flips the settings back, does the world get healed, or does it literally fall apart first? From ancient war to world government, how the winners rigged the map. So if the world is basically running on scuffed settings, who actually pressed apply changes after the war? That's the part people love to hand-wave as, the world government formed, to which I say, mate, that's not lore, that's a LinkedIn headline. The immediate post-war moment is brutal in its simplicity. 20 kings stand on the corpse of the ancient kingdom, go, never again, and literally move house to the top of the world. 19 bring their families up to Marie-Joie, rebrand themselves as celestial dragons, and centralize everything under one banner, the world government. The Nefertari clan is the weird holdout that stays in Alabasta, which already tells us this wasn't some pure, noble alliance. It was a cartel, and one member just didn't feel like moving into the timeshare in the sky. Here's an interesting thing. Geography becomes their favorite weapon. On paper, the Red Line and Grand Line look like natural chaos. Big scary continent, cursed equator, four seas neatly boxed in, but because, as far as the story hints, that X-shaped ocean layout is either artificially maintained or at least ruthlessly exploited. You want to cross between blues? Enjoy the reverse mountain death slide? Or pay the world government for a calm belt workaround? The map itself is a toll booth. Now, put your capital literally on the red line, at the crossing of the world's veins. The reverie system isn't just a cute political summit, it's ritualized pathfinding. Every few years, rulers must physically ascend to Marie-Joie, parading through the Holy Land, breathing that thin, smug air. Power doesn't just sit in the sky, it flows downward from it. You're a king in the blue, but up here you're walking past gods in space helmets kicking slaves. The whole thing is a live-action sermon about where authority lives, and then they double down with blood. Celestial dragons are gods. The D-carriers are branded enemies of the world, and special races become either tools or existential threats. Lunarians get hunted to near extinction. Buccaneers like Kuma are turned into state assets. Fishmen get shoved under the red line and enslaved for sport. Any group tied to the old world's infrastructure or ideology, erased, chained, or repurposed. Noah sitting over Fishman Island, Lunarians linked to an ancient sky kingdom, buccaneers mysteriously knowing too much about the sun god. I want to emphasize how consistent that pattern is. If your blood remembers the previous system, your blood has to go. All of this only works if most people never learn what was actually lost. So, the world government builds a tiny paranoid hard drive, Imu, the Gorosei, and a few relics like the national treasure of Marie-Joie. They're the living archives, the only ones who know why the calendar restarts, why O'Hara had to burn just for saying the ancient kingdom's name, why certain islands like God Valley and Lulusia can be deleted from the map with a light from the sky. Everyone else gets vague myths and a school textbook that is basically fanfic, on the surface, that produces 900 years of stability. No ancient weapons fired publicly, no global reset, just a slow, managed simmer. But you can only stack that much pressure into the red line, into bloodlines, into the three great powers we know today, before something finally cracks. The question is, which part blows first? The long freeze, 8 centuries of controlled chaos. And here's the annoying part. For something that dramatic, the next 800 years of history are kind of a vibes playlist. We jump from world government founded to O'Hara gets nuked with the same energy your school textbook uses to skip from the dinosaurs to World War I. People look at that timeline and go, I guess nothing important happened. To which I say, mate, that's exactly what they want you to think. Because as far as the records are concerned, anything big either got smothered while it was still local, or it got edited out so hard it might as well be a filler arc. Every rebellion is a minor incident. Every genocide is an unfortunate accident. Here's an interesting thing. We only hear about God Valley, O'Hara, and the Rocks era because the cover-up partially failed. God Valley vanishes from the map, but we still have Garp's hero title. O'Hara is literally burned off the globe, but the Buster Call is too public to fully erase. The pattern isn't nothing happened. It's anything that almost went global got quietly turned into a rumor, a medal, or a missing island. So, how do you keep a world that angry from boiling over for 8 centuries? You build a pressure valve system. That's piracy. If you're a peasant who hates the nobles, you don't start a manifesto. You grab a boat, slap a cool flag on it, and go be free. The world government actually benefits from that, because 1,000 tiny crews are way easier to stomp than one coordinated ideology. The moment a crew starts getting too popular or too political, suddenly a Marine admiral has free time in his schedule. I want to emphasize that Proto-Yonko absolutely existed in this mess. You don't get to the modern Yonko system without centuries of unofficial sea emperors first, regional monsters who tax islands, control trade routes, and in exchange promise not to sail on Maria-Joie's front lawn. They're warlords before the Shichibukai had a brand name. The government's deal is simple: rule your patch, keep the slaves and treasure flowing up, and never ever talk about the lost century. And then you've got the opt-outs. Wano closes its borders so hard it basically rage quits the whole game. Elbaf is a proud, closed, giant culture that doesn't send delegates to the reverie. The Sky Islands literally sit on top of the map, running their own dials and clouds economy, while the world government pretends the sky is just weather. These are not minor regions. They're entire pockets of power that refuse the system, which is probably why the system needs such aggressive censorship everywhere else. And to be fair, for your average citizen in a compliant kingdom, this long freeze probably feels fine. No ancient weapons going off, trade mostly stable, Marines occasionally heroic. If the only history you ever hear is the celestial dragons ended the age of terror, you're going to look at your relatively quiet life and think, yeah, seems legit. But the real crack in this 800-year ice sheet doesn't start with Roger's execution. It starts the moment someone decides to systematically read the poneglyphs again and survives long enough to compare notes. Ohara and the Return of Forbidden Memory. And that someone, unfortunately for literally everyone, is a bunch of book nerds on a tree island. Ohara is such a funny narrative choice because as far as world-shaking threats go, this is not a Yonko fleet, this is not an ancient weapon, this is a library with good funding. You've got Professor Clover, who looks like a grandpa broccoli, Nico Olivia doing fieldwork on poneglyphs, and an entire island that basically speedruns an archaeology PhD. Quietly. Systematically. They're not chasing power. They're reconstructing a calendar. Here's an interesting thing. Ohara isn't just people reading history. They're cross-referencing poneglyphs from different regions, matching grammar, building timelines, and actually getting close to naming the ancient kingdom. The moment they stop treating each stone as a random lore drop and start treating them as a networked data system, they become more dangerous than any pirate crew. Because if you can map the void century, you can also map who lied about it. The world government response to this is the Buster Call, which is basically their turn it off and on again solution for islands. And to be fair, we'd seen Buster Calls before as this extreme military option, but Ohara is where it mutates into something else. They're not wiping out a weapon facility. They're erasing librarians, children, an entire culture of curiosity. That's the moment the series quietly tells you, in this world, information is classified as a weapon of mass destruction. Clover's speech is the purest version of that. He starts walking the Gorosei through his logic, and the second he's about to say the ancient kingdom's name, they panic order his execution mid-sentence. Not when he mentions a war, not when he implies they're the victors who rewrote history, at the name, the symbol, the brand. People like to say the ancient weapons are the real threat, to which I say the guys who ruled the planet flinched harder at a proper noun than at Pluton. I want to emphasize how much Ohara actually survives. The island dies, but the books don't. Saul, the giant, and later Vegapunk arrange for the library to be evacuated to Elbaf. Suddenly, the long-lived races stop being just, wow, big funny Viking people and start functioning as accidental hard drives for the old world. When your lifespan is triple the human average, you can literally babysit banned knowledge through multiple regimes. And then there's Robin. A single 8-year-old who can read poneglyphs becomes the most wanted historian on Earth. Her bounty isn't about what she's done. It's about what she might someday decode without permission. She is O'Hara compressed into one traumatized child, walking proof that the Void Century is legible and that the government story is optional. This is where the ice starts to crack. Because once you see battleships aimed at a library, you stop reading the world government as flawed protectors and start reading them as 800-year-old suspects. And the really scary part? O'Hara isn't even the last time they do this. Years later, we watch another island, Lulusia, get erased, not by a fleet, but by something much cleaner. O'Hara was the dress rehearsal with cannons. Lulusia looks like the same script updated with God-level software. So what kind of power needs to delete both a word in a book and a country on a map? God Valley, rocks, and the prototype world reset. So, about that God-level software. The last time we saw an island vanish like a bad browser tab, it wasn't Lulusia, it was God Valley. And the scary thing is that God Valley looks less like a one-off mystery and more like a beta test for the same delete button we just watched Imu casually click. Here's what we actually know, stripped of fanfic seasoning. God Valley was an island in the Grand Line. The celestial dragons were holding one of their charming human-hunting festivals there. The Rocks pirates attacked. Garp and Roger teamed up, beat Rock's Deedzebek, and saved the nobles and slaves. Then the island stopped existing. It vanished from maps, from public memory, and from official records, which in one piece is code for "This is Void Century adjacent business." Because as far as patterns go, God Valley is basically a Void Century speedrun. You've got a powerful coalition, Rocks, rallying monsters like Kaido, Big Mom, and Whitebeard against the celestial dragons. You've got an island that suddenly matters way too much politically. And when the dust settles, total erasure. The ancient kingdom lost and got turned into a forbidden noun. God Valley lost and got turned into negative space on a chart. So what was Rocks actually trying to do? The text gives us the headline, "He wanted to be king of the world." That sounds like generic villain ambition, to which I say, in this setting, king of the world is a very specific job title that already belongs to a guy sitting on an empty throne. Rocks wasn't just strong. He was recruiting walking natural disasters, digging into taboo research, and targeting a location stuffed with celestial dragons and their national treasures. That feels less like random terrorism and more like someone reaching for the same levers the ancient kingdom once pulled. Here's an interesting thing. God Valley really starts to make sense if we treat it as a node in the ancient weapons network. Maybe Uranus isn't just some sky laser. Maybe it's part of a whole infrastructure the ancient kingdom used to shape seas and skies. Suddenly, the battle isn't just protect the slaves versus kill the nobles. It's Rocks trying to hijack the control room, the world government trying to keep the keys, and Roger showing up because the Poneglyph Trail and Joy Boys will keep pointing to these godlike systems. And to be fair, the cover-up is textbook world government PR. They erase the island, scrub the maps, and reframe the whole thing as Hero Garp saves celestial dragons, while Roger is quietly minimized because you can't have the future Pirate King on the same poster as your Marine mascot. It's O'Hara again, but with extra steroids and less paperwork. Then we cut to Lulucia getting vaporized from the sky by a ring of light that looks suspiciously like a refined version of whatever made God Valley disappear. Two islands, decades apart, same outcome. Gone like they were never there. That strongly implies Imu's reset button isn't new tech. It's old tech being reused. I want to emphasize, God Valley was a failed coup by a would-be tyrant, not some noble revolution, but the power vacuum it left, Roger rising, Rock's crew scattering, accidentally set up the Yonko era. And the Yonko system, weirdly, looks a lot like a janky recreation of an older balance of power we're only just starting to recognize. The Yonko system, bootleg ancient kingdom, or controlled anarchy. So, out of that God Valley mess, we basically get history's worst group project breakup. Rox is gone, Roger's stock is mooning, and all these S-tier psychos who used to be on the same boat suddenly have to ask, okay, who owns the ocean now? The answer is nobody. And then, very quickly, three very specific somebodies. Because as far as the post-Rox timeline goes, we watch a power vacuum slowly congeal into a system. Whitebeard starts treating the seas like his living room, planting division flags and calling them family. Big Mom turns Tatoland into a sugar-coated surveillance state. Kaido dive bombs Wano, chains a dragon to a closed country, and starts speedrunning Warlord Industrial Complex. Roger's execution doesn't end piracy. It franchises it. The world government looks at this escalating chaos and, instead of actually fixing it, slaps a label on the top 4 monsters and calls them the Yonko. Here's an interesting thing. Once you call them 4 emperors, you've basically admitted they're governments. Each Yonko becomes a regional overlord. They levy tribute, write their own laws, negotiate with other powers. If you live on Whole Cake, Dressrosa pre-Luffy, or Onigashima-era Wano, you don't meaningfully care what some guy in Maria Joa thinks. Your tax office is Big Mom's Tea Party, Doflamingo's Smile Factories, or Orochi's Goons. It's alternative governance by people who are very allergic to the word responsibility, but very into the word mine. And to be fair, this is where it starts looking like a bootleg ancient kingdom. Not one giant capital, but multiple hubs scattered across the seas, each protecting its own weird mix of races, cultures, and tech. Tato Land is basically a scuffed utopia pitch. Every race living together, giants pending, under Linlin's violently conditional protection. Wano is an isolationist weapons lab with samurai cosplay and Pluton rumors. Even Fishman Island slots in as a vassal state, first under Whitebeard's umbrella, then Big Mom's, then Luffy's promise. Semi-independent nodes shaping the global balance. We've seen that silhouette before. People say, if the Yonko are so dangerous, why not wipe them out? To which I say, because the world government is not stupid, just evil. They formalize the 3 great powers' stalemate. Marines, Shichibukai, Yonko. Precisely so, no one faction can go full Void Century 2.0. Kaido keeps Big Mom busy. Shanks plays referee. Blackbeard gatekeeps the worst secrets. As long as they're punching sideways, they're not marching on the red line. It's controlled anarchy. I want to emphasize, Yonko territories are also where the world's deleted files get stored. Persecuted groups don't survive inside the system. They survive in its blind spots. Fishmen under pirate flags. Mink and Wano samurai hiding on a closed border island. Tato Land hoarding long arms, long legs, 3 eyes, Literally everyone the celestial dragons treat as collectibles. It's messy, exploitative sanctuary, but it's still sanctuary. And no, these are not noble successors to Joy Boy's dream. They're self-interested landlords with good PR and terrifying HR. But their existence proves centralized control is fragile. If 4 pirates can carve the world into quarters, what happens when someone tries to do it on purpose? Because the Yonko are accidental echoes of the old balance. The Revolutionary Army is the first deliberate attempt in 800 years to resurrect the ancient kingdom's political project. And they're not content with just 4 corners of the map. The Revolutionary Army, Joy Boy's politics in modern clothing, and they're not content with just 4 corners of the map, because here's an interesting thing. Pirates break the rules of the game, but Dragon is trying to delete the game's code. Yonko want turf, treasure, and narrative clout. The Revolutionary Army wants something way dumber and way scarier. No more world government. Not we sit on the empty throne instead, but the throne was a bad UI decision, uninstall it. That's why they don't act like a classic army. They don't conquer Dressrosa and slap a dragon flag on it. They topple the king, empower the dwarves, free the toys, and then leave a self-sustaining movement behind. Ivankov doesn't hoard Kamabaka Kingdom as a fortress. He turns it into this chaotic haven where gender, class, and former status are all kind of shredded. You're a former king? Cool. Grab a dress and a rifle. You're a runaway Okama? You're command staff now. Baltigo works the same way. It's not Mariajoa 2.0. It's literally a chalk-white rock in the middle of nowhere. A staging ground that only exists as long as the network needs it. When it's exposed and destroyed, the organization doesn't crumble because, as far as actual power goes, their asset isn't the base, it's the web of cells and liberated islands you never see on a world map. And I want to emphasize how ancient kingdom-coded this is. The one hard fact we have is that they spread poneglyphs everywhere, instead of building a single capital that could be burned like O'Hara. Distributed truth, shared responsibility, no one point of failure. Dragon is doing the same thing with politics. He doesn't want one giant revolution. He wants 1,000 local joy boys with slightly better OPSEC. Information is their real weapon. Sabo isn't just Luffy's other brother. He's the chief of staff, who remembers being a noble and now literally infiltrates the reverie, turning the Holy Summit into a group chat leak. Kuma, the tyrant, spends years as a government dog so he can smuggle people out of Sabayodi and camp himself as a living elevator to the Sunny. That is the most cursed USB stick in history. Compare that to the poneglyph system, indestructible receipts of what the government did during the Void Century. O'Hara gets erased for reading one word. Lulucia gets Thanos lasered the moment Emu suspects it might become another O'Hara. To which I say, if you're nuking islands over literacy, maybe your PR situation is not ideal. And to be fair, from their perspective, Yonko are actually manageable. You can bargain with Big Mom, weaponize Kaido, quarantine Shanks, let Blackbeard be a useful mess. But you cannot bargain with an idea that says your entire 800-year project is illegitimate. That's where the D motif creeps back in. Dragon, son of Garp, father of Luffy, quietly sits at the intersection of hero of the Marines and future pirate king. Sabo brings insider knowledge of noble rot. Robin brings the literal lost language of the ancient kingdom. These are all people personally maimed by the system's historical crimes, pooling their trauma like its venture capital. And the punchline is that the Revolutionary Army's greatest weapon isn't their commanders, or their dragons, or their weather lasers. It's that they're rebooting the same dawn of the world ideology Joy Boy once carried. The last time that idea went global, the world government had to erase an entire century to stop it. So, what happens when the sun tries to rise a second time on a world built out of lies that can't survive daylight? Joy Boy's failed promise and the dawn that never came. So if the sun is trying to rise again, we kind of have to talk about the guy who botched the first sunrise. Joy Boy is basically the prototype dawn merchant, and he fumbled the bag so hard that an entire century got deleted. What do we actually know? Not tinfoil hat no. During the void century, Joy Boy writes an apology on a poneglyph addressed to the people of Fishman Island. He specifically mentions failing to keep a promise involving the Noah, this absurdly huge ark parked under the sea, and their future migration to the surface. That's not, "Sorry I missed dinner." That's, "Sorry I failed a civilizational relocation project." Here's an interesting thing. If you're promising an entire persecuted race a home on the surface, you're not just booking hotel rooms. You're talking about dismantling the Red Line as a literal wall, breaking the caste system that treats fishmen as subhuman, and rewiring how the world is laid out. The Noah, Poseidon, and even Zunesha start to look like infrastructure for a world redesign, not just cool lore toys. So why does Joy Boy fail? The safest read is that whatever alliance he was part of, call it the Ancient Kingdom, call it the pre-world government power block, loses control of at least some of its tools before the plan is finished. Suddenly, the people trying to reshape the seas are on defense. That's when the poneglyphs show up. Noah gets dry-docked for 800 years, and Zunesha is sentenced to walk. The whole thing shifts from "we're building a new world" to "we're hiding the manual from the people who hijacked the old one." And to be fair, Oda keeps Joy Boy deliberately vague. We don't know if he's a king, a pirate, a god, or just Luffy with better time management. But the pattern is loud. Every time someone stumbles onto his wavelength, history tries to repeat. Roger reaches Laugh Tale, learns the truth, laughs, and says they were too early. Luffy, with zero context, independently arrives at the same core idea. Tear down borders, eat meat, everyone gets to be free. As far as Inherited Will goes, that's the series screaming that the Joy Boy program is still running in the background. The world itself is in on it. The Sea Kings literally talk about waiting for a future Poseidon to guide Noah. Fishman Island has a prophecy about a king who will lead them to the surface. The Minks and Wano wait centuries for a dawn tied to a specific clan and a specific pirate wearing a straw hat. Different races, different calendars, same vague countdown. You really think that's an accident? And every time that countdown ticks too low, the world government panics. O'Hara gets erased for learning the ancient kingdom's name. God Valley and Lulusia vanish off the map the second they become politically inconvenient. The empty throne is a lie, Emu is probably older than the calendar, and the ancient weapons are treated like delete buttons, not deterrents. I want to emphasize, if Joy Boy's failed promise centers on Fishman Island and the sea, then the missing chapters of his blueprint are hiding in specific bloodlines, islands, and sky people. So next, we dig into those races and regions one by one and ask, what part of the original world design are they secretly still carrying? Erased peoples, erased chapters, Lunarians, buccaneers, and more. So if the blueprint survived in bloodlines and islands, We now have to talk about the really uncomfortable part. The blueprint also survived in people the world government tried to delete, not just oppress, literally uninstall from the world. And to be fair, when your whole power system is built on a cover-up, anyone walking around as a spoiler is kind of a problem. Here's an interesting thing. The races that keep getting erased, chained up, or pushed to the edge of the map all share the same trait. They're plugged into the old operating system. Lunarians are stapled to the sky and the red line. Buccaneers are stapled to a sun god. Fishmen and merfolk are stapled to sea kings and undersea ruins. Giants and minks and skypians are stapled to ancient libraries, trees, and cloud tech. This isn't random fantasy racism. It's targeted deletion of specific drivers the ancient kingdom once used. Lunarians are the most obvious red flag. Once literally called gods, with black wings, flame halos, and durability that makes Kado look squishy, they were supposedly wiped out on the red line itself. Now what do we have? One survivor, King, reduced to a lab specimen for the world government's favorite war criminal, Vegapunk. People ask, why is a flying fireman such a big deal? To which I say, because as far as we can tell, his entire race used to live on the world's central pillar. The same structure Maria Joie now occupies. The same vertical axis Uranus probably interacts with if it's a sky-based weapon. If Lunarians are the original admin account for the red line, then King's body is literally evidence the current world layout is a retrofit. Buccaneers are the land-based version of that problem. Kuma's flashback shows us a race hunted for their blood and absurd strength, forced into slavery, and quietly linked to the legend of Nika. His father knows the sun god story. The celestial dragons know it. They execute people for dancing and laughing in the wrong way. I want to emphasize a race that naturally resonates with Nika and shows up wrapped in Christian imagery, giant shackles, and a D-adjacent backstory is basically a walking reminder that the gods on top of the red line are cosplayers. You can't monopolize godhood when the real worship protocol is baked into some guy's DNA. Fishmen and merfolk get the same treatment, just wetter. Their inferior race status is sold as simple bigotry, but look at what they can do. They talk to sea kings. They live next to Noah, a gigantic mystery ship tied to Joy Boy's broken promise. They swim through undersea ruins and poneglyphs like it's Tuesday. If the ancient kingdom had a sea layer in its system, these are the default users. Enslaving them isn't just cruelty, it's access control. You keep the people who can literally move the world's foundations at the bottom of the food chain. Giants round out the pattern as walking archives, massive lifespans, warrior culture, and now, thanks to Saul, a hidden Elbaf library full of O'Hara's books. Even if most giants don't know the Void Century, their island is basically a cold storage server for pre-government knowledge. Add Skypians with their cloud dials and ancient murals, minks with their mysterious bonds, and Zoo's moving elephant, and you start to see it. The old network was multi-species on purpose. So when the world government scatters, enslaves, or isolates these races, they're not just being cartoon villains. They're breaking up the human and non-human mesh network that once let the ancient kingdom system talk to itself across sea, sky, and land. Which raises the next question. If the people are the corrupted files, what about the places? Because the islands themselves, Scipia, Wano, O'Hara, are like geographic hard drives where fragments of that old code are still quietly running, waiting for someone reckless enough to boot them back up. Islands as hard drives, Scipia, Wano, O'Hara, and God Valley. So if the races are the mesh network, the islands are the hard drives. The world government didn't just censor a story. They've been yanking out discs, smashing them, and pretending the beeping sound is natural disaster. Because as far as One Piece geography goes, we're basically walking through a crime scene with the chalk outlines still visible. Here's an interesting thing. Each mystery island stores a different file type. Skypiea is like the Mythology and Network Protocols folder. Wano is Hardware Schematics and Encryption Keys. O'Hara is the Forbidden Research Directory. God Valley and Lulusia? Those are the drives that blue-screened the system so hard that Emu literally hit format from orbit. Start with Skypiea and Shandora. Up in the clouds, in a forgotten sky city, we get the Golden Bell poneglyph spelling out Poseidon Intel and Joy Boy connections. We get Shandora's ancient alliance with the ancient kingdom, and we get a culture that casually worships a sun god Nika, long before the Gorosei start having panic attacks about it. People like to treat Skypiea as a fun detour, to which I say, you don't accidentally stash a Void Century Rosetta Stone in your gag arc. The Sky People feel like a partner civilization, maybe tied to Uranus or some global communication grid that once linked sea, sky, and land. It's Wi-Fi on a Drum Island-level budget. Then Wano shows up as the paranoid IT department, closed borders, isolationist policy, and under the floorboards of the country, Pluton, the actual ancient weapon, or at least the dock for it, sleeping beneath a nation that also just happens to have the Kozuki clan, the only confirmed manufacturers of poneglyphs. I want to emphasize how wild that combo is. Wano is both the factory that carved the indestructible hard drives and the vault that stores the nuclear launch codes. And to be fair, if your ancestors helped build a world reset button, you'd probably slam the firewall shut too. O'Hara, by contrast, is the modern decryption lab. No weapons, no sky islands, just a bunch of nerds in a tree library trying to run data recovery on scattered poneglyph fragments. They get far enough to identify the ancient kingdom's true name, and the response from the world government is basically, cool discovery, shame about your island, Buster Call as antivirus, which brings us to God Valley and Lulusia, the corrupted drives. God Valley vanishes off the map after some celestial dragon incident. Lulusia gets Thanos lasered by an unknown sky-based power the moment its people start talking revolution, and Sabo glimpses Emu. That's not random. That's the same delete key that was probably used on other Void Century hotspots. So if the map itself is redacted, what does the unedited world look like? In the next section, we're finally going to stop hand-waving and lay out a clean, chronological timeline, stitching these races, islands, and weapons into one story of how everything broke and how it might be about to reboot. The true timeline, from dawn to darkness to a second sunrise. So let's finally do the cursed thing every One Piece fan says they want, and then immediately regrets: a clean timeline. People love to say, well, we just don't know what happened in the Void Century, to which I say, we kind of do. Oda has actually been drip-feeding us enough crumbs to reconstruct the skeleton of an 800-year tragedy. Pre-Void, we start with the ancient kingdom. Not a single city, but a distributed civilization. Think Shandians in the sky, fishmen below, probably Lunarians up on some pre-red line solar panel nightmare, all plugged into one shared infrastructure network. The ancient weapons aren't doomsday buttons here. They're world-scale utilities. Poseidon as traffic control for sea kings, Pluton as a mobile terraforming shipyard, Uranus as literal climate and maybe orbit management. It's less evil empire and more overambitious startup trying to refactor the planet. Then the void century hits, and the patch notes get bloody. 20 human kings form a coalition because, as far as they're concerned, this distributed, race-inclusive system is heresy. Ideology turns into open war. Ancient weapons get yanked out of their intended roles and either deployed as weapons or sabotaged. Joy Boy's grand project, the first dawn, the promised migration, the Noah plan, collapses. He leaves that apology to Fishman Island. The poneglyph tech gets rolled out as a last-ditch backup drive, and the ancient kingdom basically speedruns, saved to external hard disk before being wiped. Immediate aftermath. The winners write the OS. The world government is founded. The 20 kings' families move to Maria Joie, and the celestial dragons literally sit on top of the world. Geography becomes a weapon. Build the red line/grand line choke system. Bury old routes. Force all traffic through their checkpoints. Bloodlines become DRM. Giants, fishmen, lunarians, buccaneers, anyone tied to the old network either get collared, scattered, or quarantined, and to be fair, they don't just ban the ancient kingdom's ideology, they erase its name. O'Hara proves that single word is enough to trigger a buster call. Then we get the long freeze. Centuries of managed chaos. Piracy is allowed as a pressure valve. Shichibukai-style arrangements pop up, and isolated strongholds like Wano and Elbaf function as unpatched legacy servers. Every time a kingdom, a scholar group, or a rogue D pokes too hard at the logs, Imu and the Gorosei quietly hit the kill switch. Here's an interesting thing. God Valley, O'Hara, and later Lulusia all vanish in basically the same way. Map redaction plus memory holing. Modern turning points crack the ice. God Valley's incident scrambles Rox, Garp, Roger, and the celestial dragons into one giant classified mess. O'Hara gets close enough to reconstruct the ancient kingdom's name that the government burns an island in year 1492 of their shiny new calendar. Roger reaches Laugh Tale, reads the full script, and chooses not to start the revolution himself. Instead, he weaponizes myth, kicks off the Great Pirate Era, and trusts inherited will to do a delayed software update. That brings us from fun pirate sandbox to third act of an 800-year reboot attempt. Yonko rise as quasi-sovereigns, the Revolutionary Army forms as a direct attack on the system rather than just its cops. Poseidon is reborn in Shirahoshi, Pluton's existence in Wano is basically confirmed, and Imu stops pretending by deleting Lulusia with what looks a lot like Uranus. I want to emphasize how loud that is. The hidden admin account just used God mode in public. So where are we now? Joy Boy's ghost in the code, the rigged world government OS, and new challengers. Luffy, Dragon, Blackbeard, Teach's weird fruit stacking, are all colliding around the same reset buttons. The first dawn failed. This second sunrise might actually break the sky. But what does a rebooted world even look like, and who gets left out of that utopia this time? The first world government, a peace treaty written in blood. So, if Joy Boy was the first failed sunrise, the world government is the permanent eclipse. People love to picture its founding as this UN, but make it anime moment of global cooperation, to which I say, mate, that's propaganda with better robes, because as far as the actual history goes, we're looking at the end phase of a 100-year world-scale civil war. The ancient kingdom isn't just some country that lost. It's a prototype global superpower built around a different operating system for the world. They're networking races, rewriting the sea map, playing with ancient weapons that can literally reset continents. The 20 kingdoms don't just beat that in a fair fight. They dogpile it, then sit down and say, "Cool, we are never letting anyone do that again." Here's an interesting thing. The so-called founding is basically a coordinated non-aggression pact. These kings have been terrified rivals for generations. Suddenly, they're best friends? No. They're mutually traumatized survivors of a Joy Boy-era tech boom that almost deleted them. So, they lock in 3 incentives. First, collective protection from ancient weapons, any Pluton blueprint, any Poseidon bloodline, any vague rumor of Uranus, shared intel, shared crackdown. Second, shared control over sea trade routes. You get the Holy Land on the Red Line as the toll booth of the planet, and then later the Shichibukai and Yonko as outsourced border guards. Third, and I want to emphasize this, they don't just erase the ancient kingdom's army. They promise to erase its idea. This is why Ohara gets burned for a single name. Not a battleship, not a weapon activation code, a word. The ideology wipe clause of that original pact is still running like antivirus in the background. Any island that starts reconstructing that OS, Ohara, God Valley, Lulucia, mysteriously vanishes. Totally a coincidence. Very natural disaster. Please ignore the sky laser. Structurally, the system is built to make that pact immortal. Move the capital to the Red Line, the one landmass nobody can easily invade. Elevate the 20 families into celestial dragons, literal living trophies of victory. Their job is not governance. It's to stand around being so cartoonishly untouchable that everyone remembers who won the war. And to be fair, as visual storytelling, it's incredibly efficient. You see a bubble helmet, you instantly understand 800 years of structural violence. Then you slap the empty throne myth on top. No single king of the world, just a beautiful circle of equal nations, right? It's PR cover for a very real oligarchy with an invisible root admin account named Imu. The empty throne is the world's biggest "we swear we logged out" screen. The long-term result is a government whose core design principle is not justice, not even stability. It's permanent suppression. Any technology, bloodline, or ideology that smells like ancient kingdom code gets quarantined. Lunarians, buccaneers, Fishman prophecies, poneglyphs, Vegapunk's energy research, it's all flagged as malware. Which raises the uncomfortable question, if the whole OS is built to crush reboots, what kind of glitch does it take to crash it? And who's secretly holding the kill switch? Imu and the phantom sovereign problem. So, about that kill switch, the series quietly answers, yeah, someone has it. And then cuts to a guy sitting on the supposedly empty throne like it's his living room couch. The world's biggest political myth is, no one rules the world. And One Piece just went, actually, it's this cryptid in a crown, because as far as official propaganda goes, the empty throne is the whole moral OS. 50 kings, equal votes, no single sovereign, peace through shared restraint. It's the United Nations if the chair in the middle was a religious relic. And then Imu walks up, sits down, and the Gorosei kneel like interns who just saw the CEO log into the Zoom call. That's not a minor plot twist. That's the founding story being a lie from day one, or getting hijacked almost immediately. Here's an interesting thing. Those are 2 very different timelines. Model 1 is Imu the architect. Imu was already around in the Void Century, helped design the world government, and just never left. The calendar reset to year 1, the ancient kingdom got erased, and Imu quietly slid from public king to phantom sovereign. That would mean the same mind that fought Joy Boy is the one approving Buster Calls, the same grudge driving both the fall of the ancient kingdom and the destruction of O'Hara and Lulusia. The war isn't 800 years old. It's ongoing with one continuous player. Model 2 is Imu the Usurper. The empty throne might have actually been empty for a while, a kind of post-war compromise between the 20 families. Then someone, maybe a descendant, maybe an outsider, gets access to ancient kingdom knowledge, sits on the throne in secret, and weaponizes the whole system. That shifts the story from the world government was born evil to it rotted from the inside, which, to be fair, is very on brand for a series where pirates are often nicer than cops. Either way, we're stuck with the same problem. Imu is old, like the calendar doesn't even name the period I was born in old. The series keeps dangling this vague, horrifying idea that void century science didn't vanish. It just went private. Eternal youth via the op-op fruit, lunarian durability and regeneration, ancient kingdom biotech that can rewrite weather and probably bones. Pick your flavor, but something is letting this one sovereign sit on top of history while everyone else dies on schedule. And I want to emphasize, that's not just a cool villain flex. If Imu is literally a surviving asset of the ancient war, whether architect or usurper, then Imu's priorities are not random. Lulusia isn't just, let's test the death laser. It's a live-fire continuation of the same sky-editing weapons used against the ancient kingdom. The obsession with specific bloodlines, Nefertari, D, Lunarian, Buccaneer, is not quirky royal racism. It's targeted cleanup of enemy code. People say, Imu is just a tyrant, to which I say, sure, and your operating system is just some apps. Imu is policy continuity. Every island erased, every library burned, every prophecy suppressed is one more move in a war that never ended. Which raises the real question. When Joy Boy's reboot finally hits, is it crashing a system that's broken, or one that's still working exactly as designed? The celestial dragons, cosplaying gods with stolen history. And if Imu is the operating system, the celestial dragons are the cursed UI. They're what the world actually has to look at every day. One Piece doesn't just give us tyrants, it gives us tyrants in cosplay, because as far as propaganda goes, nothing beats a dress code. Here's an interesting thing. The original 20 kings were just that, kings, political winners in a very bloody, very normal war. Then they moved to Mariajois, sit on top of the Red Line, and suddenly their descendants are celestial dragons, walking PR statements that the victors of the Void Century weren't just stronger, they were right. You don't just win, you reboot the calendar, build your capital on the world's spine, and rebrand your grandkids as literal gods in the New World narrative. And to be fair, if you're going to lie, commit. These people never touch the ground. They waddle around in those glass bubble helmets like discount astronauts. They ride slaves like furniture. All of that isn't just cartoon evil, it's ritualized separation. The taboo isn't about germs, it's about species. The system is screaming at you. These are not humans with power. These are a higher category of being. How do you rebel against something that's framed as being above biology? People say, the celestial dragons are just random decadent nobles. To which I say, my friend, nothing this consistent is random. Their entire lifestyle is a training program. By making the ruling class visibly untouchable and irrational, the regime teaches you that injustice is not a bug, it's the weather. You see Charlos buy a mermaid, shoot a civilian, call a buster call like he's ordering takeout, and the lesson is, don't ask why, ask how to survive. I want to emphasize how deep this goes. The slave collars, the auctions at Sabaody, the way fishermen, giants, and even children are tagged and sold. This is the trauma logic of the void century kept on life support. The ancient kingdom was erased, so the pain that beat it has to be kept visible. Every chained body is a screensaver reminding the world what happens when you challenge the gods. And then we get to the really cursed detail. Their iconography is stolen. The hoof mark of the celestial dragons. It reads like a bastardized version of the sun and wing motifs tied to Lunarians and other gods of the sky. The heavenly dragon title, the way the D clan is labeled the enemy of the gods, that's probably just the original Joy Boy Alliance branding flipped. The so-called gods are literally wearing their enemy's culture as trophies. Once you see that, Marie-Joie stops looking like Olympus and starts looking like a crime scene museum, which raises the next problem. If the gods are cosplay, what happens when the costume rips on live TV? The Marines, justice as a software patch. So when the costume finally rips on live TV, the world doesn't see a god underneath. It sees a cop, because that's what the Marines are. Not the core of the world government, but the customer service department for a 900-year-old crime syndicate. People like to talk about the Marines like they're this ancient pillar of order, to which I say, mate, if they were really foundational, the void century wouldn't be a black box, it would be a training manual. Here's an interesting thing. We never hear about Marines during the actual void century. We hear about 20 kings, an ancient kingdom, weapons that can literally reset the world map. No G1, no rank structure, no, yes, Fleet Admiral Emu, sir. The reasonable read is that the original regime wins, builds Marie-Joie, rewrites the calendar, and only then realizes, oh, we kind of need a moral-looking interface so the peasants don't notice the sky got patched. The Marines are that patch, a clean blue U, eye over a very cursed operating system. And once you see them as software, their different justices start looking like bug fix notes. Absolute justice, lazy justice, moral justice. These are not lofty philosophies. They're coping strategies. The job is protect the regime. The narrative is protect the people. Those two lines of code keep conflicting, so every officer writes their own workaround. Akainu's absolute justice is the brutal version. If anything might someday threaten the world government, delete it now, kids included. Aokiji's so-called lazy justice is the burnout dev who still believes in helping civilians but knows the product is rotten, so he quietly throttles the worst tickets. Kizaru is that terrifying middle ground where the guy doing war crimes is technically just following specs. And to be fair, you also get moral justice types like Fujitora, who literally shows up, reads the documentation and goes, okay, this system is a mess. I'm going to uninstall the warlords in public. I want to emphasize how engineered this all feels. The three-admiral system isn't just cool color coding. It's a void century trauma response. The old gods lost one catastrophic world war. They are never letting a second ancient kingdom cluster up, so they build a standing triad of walking natural disasters who can be airdropped anywhere the moment an island starts looking too curious, too united, too Joy Boy. Same with the Buster Call. Fans treat it like an overkill set piece because, as far as shonen powers go, 10 battleships and 5 vice admirals is almost quaint next to giant magma fists. But conceptually, it's the Wipe Island button, a hard reset on any node that might be reconstructing the old network. O'Hara is the cleanest example. These are librarians. Their big crime is learning a single forbidden proper noun, the name of the ancient kingdom. The response is a buster call that doesn't even pretend to target individuals. The goal isn't justice, it's data deletion. God Valley is the flip side. We still don't know the full story, but we know two things. Celestial dragons were present, and the island itself vanished from the map. One operation centered on erasing history, the other on protecting living gods, and both end with geography getting 404'd. Once you line those up, Void Century Fear, Admiral Triad, Buster Calls, Island Erasures, the Marines stop looking like the fist and start looking like the glove. The real fist is the unseen protocol that decides which islands get to exist at all. And the scary part is, what happens when someone inside the glove decides to punch the other way? Tamhar, the birth of the Yonko, how the government outsourced chaos. So when a fist inside the glove finally swings the other way, what do you do if you're the world government and you absolutely do not want another Joy Boy scale free-for-all? You don't get rid of chaos. You franchise it. After Roger's execution, people like to talk about the Great Pirate Era, as if it's this organic explosion of freedom and dreams, to which I say, yes, but also it's an absolute zoning nightmare. The Pirate King dies, the title goes vacant, and suddenly every idiot with a boat and a vibe is sailing out, because, as far as the story is concerned, the seas just turned into an open-world PvP server. That initial rush is messy and romantic, but it's not sustainable. Power in one piece always coagulates. So what actually happens? Over time, the New World stops being this free-for-all and hardens into territories. Whitebeard here, Big Mom there, Kaido over Wano, Shanks floating like a red-haired IT department that only shows up when the server's on fire. The post-Roger vacuum doesn't stay a vacuum. It crystallizes around a few overwhelmingly strong captains who can project power over multiple islands at once. Here's an interesting thing. The series presents this like a natural evolution, but it smells very managed ecosystem. The government slaps the label Yonko on these monsters and then kind of just lets them sit. Publicly, they're the worst of the worst. Secretly, they're the perfect containment field. Most of the really high-level chaos gets bottled up in one region. The New World, behind the Red Line, away from Maria Joie, and away from most civilians who might start asking annoying questions like, why is the calendar missing 100 years? I want to emphasize how convenient this is. Yonko territories function like unofficial buffer states. You want to approach something spicy, like Wano's connection to ancient weapons blueprints, or Elbaf's giant lore, or that vague mess around God Valley's missing island slot. Oops, it's inside an Emperor's influence zone. Enjoy getting past a Yonko fleet, their allied crews, and 10,000 homies, gifters, or whatever Kaido was doing on his HR forms. And to be fair, the Yonko are not loyal attack dogs. They're selfish, they're unstable, they're constantly trying to kill each other. But that's exactly why the system works for the regime. They keep ambitious rookies busy grinding in late-game content. They burn each other's manpower. They generate headline-friendly disasters that justify permanent marine militarization. Look, citizens, we need more Buster Calls and Seraphim. Have you seen what Big Mom did to that one island? Meanwhile, the bounty system is playing 4D hypocrisy. The government throws out cartoonishly huge numbers, 4 billion, 5 billion, like they're condemning these people. But those numbers are also a very public do not touch sign. Selective enforcement kicks in hard. Somehow, the Yonko's core territories stay strangely unbuster called, especially around places suspiciously close to void century hotspots. So when people say, "Why don't the Marines just team up and wipe out every emperor?" the answer is, why would they delete their own firewall? The real question is what happens when that outsourced chaos stops circling the New World and starts sailing directly for the empty throne's biggest lie. Shichibukai, legalized pirates as historical firewalls. So the world government looks at that problem and goes, what if we just hire the monsters? The Shichibukai are literally that, a loyalty program for pirates. You get legal immunity, a flag, sometimes a marine escort, and in exchange you act as a semi-official attack dog and regional shock absorber. It's not justice, it's outsourcing sin. On paper, the bargain is simple. The warlords keep other pirates in check, stabilize their turf, and show up when the government needs a flashy war headline. In practice, it's a moral car crash that somehow passes inspection every year. Because as far as the elders are concerned, it doesn't matter if Crocodile starves a country, as long as that country doesn't start asking why the calendar has a 900-year hole and why the desert is hiding a poneglyph. Here's an interesting thing. Every major warlord we actually spend time with is parked on or near a historical choke point. Crocodile isn't in Alabasta by accident. He builds Baroque works right on top of Pluton rumors and a royal family that just happens to be one of the 20 who know way too much. Doflamingo doesn't just vibe in Dressrosa. He's sitting on celestial dragon blackmail, trafficking SAD and smiles, and quietly skimming the ancient weapons economy. My hawk? He's basically the human lighthouse of the Grand Line's midpoint, a one-man early warning system for any swordsman or pirate idiot strong enough to threaten the balance. People say, the warlords are just a military pillar, to which I say, you're missing the actual job description. The real value is informational. These are legalized pirates embedded in the most sensitive zones on the map. They monitor dangerous islands, crush local rebellions before they turn into Ohara 2.0, and intercept any whispers about poneglyphs or ancient weapons before those whispers become a movement. If a scholar, a revolutionary, or some joy boy LARPing rookie gets too curious, odds are they run into a warlord first, not a buster call. I want to emphasize how elegant and disgusting that is. The government gets plausible deniability. Oh no, that was just Crocodile being Crocodile, while quietly using him as a firewall around Pluton intel. Doflamingo hoards secrets about Mary Joaz and God Valley, but that's still safer, from their perspective, than those secrets leaking into the general pirate population. It's a containment system built out of ego and greed. And to be fair, it works, until it doesn't. By the time Fujitora is ranting about abolishing the Shichibukai, this isn't some sudden moral awakening. It's a calculated tech upgrade. Once Vegapunk's SSG and the Seraphim come online, the cost-benefit flips. Why tolerate unpredictable pirates sitting on void century hotspots when you can deploy obedient child-sized WMDs modeled on those same pirates? The abolition is less, we regret our sins, and more, your subscription has expired, please enjoy being hunted again. Which raises the next ugly question. If the old pirate firewalls are gone, what exactly are the SSG guarding, and what did the government feel confident enough to move onto the front lines? The Revolutionary Army, a rebellion, 800 years in the making. What are the SSG really guarding? The ugly answer is the operating system of the world, And once you ask that, you kind of have to talk about the only group trying to uninstall it, instead of just downloading cooler pirate skins. Because as far as stated goals go, pirates are actually pretty modest. Even the Yonko mostly want territory, treasure, personal freedom, maybe a cool skull flag brand deal. Dragon's Revolutionary Army is the first organization since the ancient kingdom whose explicit target is the world government itself. Not a marine base, not a celestial dragon. The whole thing. The calendar, the borders, the gods, the void century gag order. That's a different tier of crime. And here's an interesting thing. The guy leading this 800-year overdue uninstall process is, on paper, a nobody from the East Blue. Monkey D. Dragon is Garp's son, Luffy's father, and somehow the least talked about member of that family tree. That's not an accident. That's inherited will cosplay. The story keeps telling us that Joy Boy isn't just one guy. He's a recurring role. Dragon feels like the version who looked at the script, saw the Become Pirate King route, and said, to which I say, what if we speedrun regime change instead? I want to emphasize how weird their tactics are compared to every other power block. The world government conquers and sanitizes. Pirates occupy and extort. The Revolutionary Army shows up, blows up a symbol, flips a kingdom's internal logic, and then leaves. They're not building an empire. They're building ideological beachheads. Beltigo, Kamabaka, the scattered cells. They're like a virus that doesn't care about land, only about rewriting the code running on people's brains. That's why they can win in places like Lulucia and still have the island literally deleted from the map and the movement survive. Look at who they recruit. Kuma, a buccaneer tied to the God Valley incident, turned into a walking censorship project by Vegapunk and the SSG. Sabo, a discarded noble from Goa, that same East Blue trash heap the world government uses as a PR poster for peaceful kingdoms. Nico Robin, last survivor of O'Hara, whose scholars were burned because they found one forbidden word, the name of the ancient kingdom. This isn't random. The army is hoarding exactly the people and data that the government has tried hardest to erase. And to be fair, that makes them terrifying from Emu's perspective. Every lost island, O'Hara, God Valley, Lulucia, follows the same pattern. Someone connects too many dots about the old world layout, about ancient weapons as a reset system, about Joy Boy's failed promise, and suddenly the delete key gets pressed. The revolutionaries are basically building a backup drive of all those near-erased save files. How close are they to reconstructing the original world build? And what happens when Dragon finally decides to hit restore instead of copy? Ancient weapons as balance of terror, not doomsday toys. So when Dragon finally hits restore, what's the file he's actually loading? It's not just joyboy.exe. It's a whole operating system built around 3 pieces of mutually assured nightmare fuel: Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus. People love to call them doomsday weapons, to which I say, sure, if your doomsday is run by a game theorist with control issues. Here's an interesting thing. Each weapon is terrifying alone, but weirdly incomplete. Pluton is not just a big cannon boat. It's a blueprint for an era of warships, a mass-producible fleet design that can literally redraw coastlines. Poseidon is not a laser beam. It's a bloodline-based command protocol for sea kings, turning the entire ocean into a programmable minefield. Uranus is the vaguest mess of the 3, some kind of sky-based area deletion button tied to the upper atmosphere, and maybe the ancient sky races. The important part isn't that they can destroy stuff. It's that they were clearly designed to interlock into a single world-scale control system, because as far as global power goes, this is mutual assured destruction with extra steps. Imagine the ancient kingdom sitting on Pluton-style fleets, partnered with a Poseidon who can sink any navy, backed by a Uranus that can delete islands or airspace. If one rival kingdom escalates with ships, you drown them. If they retreat inland, you bomb from orbit. If they try to live on floating islands, you pull the sky down. You don't get a regular empire out of that. You get a map where nobody can push too far without risking total annihilation. And I want to emphasize that logic survives into the present. The world government, the Yonko system, even the Revolutionary Army are all weird, janky descendants of this original deterrence architecture. The five elders aren't panicking about Pluton because they want a cool ship. They're panicking because the reappearance of any one weapon implies the potential reactivation of the whole system. That's why the 20 kingdoms didn't just seize the toys and call it a day. They went after blueprints in Water 7, bloodlines like Poseidon's Mermaid Princess line on Fishman Island, and locations like Wano's buried Pluton and whatever Uranus is doing up in the Sky Islands. They weren't trying to become the sole superpower. They were trying to delete the entire MAD framework so no one could ever run that script again. And to be fair, if you've just survived a century-long arms race, uninstall everything sounds pretty reasonable. Look at modern scramble points: Alabasta with the Pluton poneglyph, Fishman Island with Poseidon, Wano literally sitting on Pluton's coffin, and Skypa's poneglyph, plus the weird vanishing islands pattern around Lulusia. Every crisis is a speed run of the Void Century endgame. Crocodile goes after Alabasta? That's a mini version of a kingdom trying to grab the ship piece. Big Mom and Kaido targeting Wano and Fishman Island? That's a rerun of forces converging on weapon nodes. So the question isn't who fires the big gun first, it's who rebuilds the full deterrence network, and what happens to a world that's already cracking when that balance comes back online. Pluton and Wano, the locked gate of the old world. So if the deterrence network is the real endgame, Pluton is the piece that makes the whole puzzle start screaming. Because as far as ancient weapons go, Pluton is the messiest on paper and the most over-engineered in practice. We're told Pluton is in Wano. Cool, simple. Giant ship, closed country, done. Except the blueprints were in Water 7, the key poneglyph was in Alabasta, and none of those places are Wano. People call this a contradiction, to which I say, mate, you're a contradiction. This isn't Oda fumbling. It reads like a multi-layered security protocol. Location in one place, instructions in another, activation lore in a third. It's literally two-factor authentication, but with continents. Here's an interesting thing. Every piece is guarded by a family that opted out of full world government assimilation. The Nefertari stay on the surface instead of becoming celestial dragons. Tom's line in Water 7 protects the blueprints at the cost of their lives. Wano goes full isolationist. That's not random. That looks like the ancient kingdom, scattering both the weapon and the user manual across ideologically aligned hosts. So why is Wano closed? The easy answer is samurai xenophobia. And to be fair, that's how it's sold in story at first. But once you know Pluton is literally beneath the country's topography, the closed borders start looking less like racism and more like hazard containment. They are sitting on a world-ending asset. Someone, probably Joy Boy or his faction, told the Kozuki, "You do not open this gate until the right dawn, not until the sea level, the red line, the promised mermaid princess, all line up again. I want to emphasize how specific the Kozuki role is here. They don't just carve poneglyphs, they define the entire information architecture of the Void Century. They engrave the message about Poseidon on Fishman Island. They encode the ancient kingdom's name that Ohara died for. With Wano, they go one step further. They build the vault, and they write the operating manual on stone. Then they literally terraform their country into a lid over the weapon. Odin's logbook basically reads like a man who has seen the instruction screen and is trying desperately to hit continue. He wants to open the borders not because he's a tourism influencer, but because he knows Wano's isolation was a temporary lock, timed for Joy Boy's return. Momonosuke, on the other hand, is that player who's like, maybe we don't press the giant ominous button today? And honestly, we relate. And this is the scary part. In that context, opening Wano's borders stops being a political reform slogan and becomes a weapons activation step. It's flipping the safety off Pluton in a world already cracking under Imu, under the Red Line, under Lulusia-level erasures. So when that gate finally moves, are we witnessing liberation or the start of a controlled demolition of the current world? Poseidon and Fishman Island, the ocean's veto power. And if Pluton is flipping the safety off the world, Poseidon is the hand hovering over the actually drop it button, because as far as quiet, structural terror goes, Shirahoshi is the most overpowered character in the series who spends 90% of her time crying next to a giant goldfish. Here's an interesting thing. Poseidon's power isn't big sea monster go brrr. It's command over sea kings, which are basically the nervous system of the ocean. They're the ones who can drag ships, swallow islands, and, in the calm belt, literally define which routes are even usable. They also carry the giant Sea King conversation network we see with the Roger pirates, so we're talking about control over deep-sea travel, long-distance communication, and, if you really want to get spicy, the creatures gnawing on the foundations of the Red Line itself. Now plug that into geography. Fishman Island is directly beneath Marie-Joie, sitting on the only stable tunnel connecting the first half of the Grand Line to the New World. Every pirate, every marine, every world noble shipping their latest war crime accessory has to pass through that neighborhood, which means Poseidon is a silent veto built into the map. You anger the wrong princess, and suddenly the Sea Kings accidentally sink a few convoys, then a few more. Then, whoops, global shipping lanes just evaporated overnight. How long does the world government last without tribute, food, or slaves reaching the Holy Land? People like to say, well, why doesn't the government just wipe Fishman Island off the map? To which I say, cool idea. Let's threaten genocide directly above the one bloodline that can weaponize the entire ocean. What's the worst that could happen? And, to be fair, they probably have plans. But if they push too hard and Shirahoshi snaps, you don't just lose ships. You risk coordinated Sea King strikes on the Red Line, on Marie-Joie, maybe even on those untouchable routes the celestial dragons use. I want to emphasize how old this leverage is. Joy Boy's failed promise wasn't, sorry, I forgot to build you a theme park. It was about bringing the fishmen up into the sun as equal partners in whatever the ancient kingdom was running. Not a segregated undersea stopover, but a node in a shared, integrated network. Noah as a migration arc, Poseidon as the escort and traffic control. The Void Century project looks a lot like tear down the Red Line, remix the seas, and let the ocean peoples move freely. The world government wins that war, buries the history, but keeps the problem. They can't exterminate Fishman Island without risking Poseidon, so they do the next best thing: treaties, propaganda, and selective neglect. You get Reverie-era, "we support Fishman rights" speeches while Fishman Island is stuck under a Yonko protection racket. You get surface world racism baked in so deep that any move toward equality looks radical and dangerous. And hanging over all of that is the promised day Neptune keeps talking about. The day Noah moves, the day the Sea Kings gather, the day Poseidon stops being a veto and becomes an active vote. What happens when that day collides with Pluton waking up and whatever Uranus actually is, on a world already cracking at the seams? Uranus and the sky, the missing weapon that already fired. And if Poseidon is the sea's veto and Pluton is the land's nuke, that leaves the awkward third sibling we've all been kind of avoiding: Uranus, the sky vote, the one weapon that, as far as the story's concerned, might have already won. Because we need to talk about a pattern that's way too specific to be a coincidence. God Valley didn't just get lost. It vanished so hard that even its coordinates are treated like a fairy tale. Lulusia doesn't just get bombed. It's literally erased from a global map in real time, while Sabo is watching the sky turn into a geometric horror show. And right before that, we see Imu casually circling random islands on that same map like they're options in a weather app. That's not a ship, that's a menu. Now layer that over something the story has been quietly screaming about since Skypiea. The sky is weird. Islands floating at fixed altitudes, milky roads, knock-up streams that behave like scripted launch pads, weather so broken that the Grand Line is basically a mood ring. People like Ganfall talk about the will of the sky like it's a thing, and to be fair, One Piece characters will give willpower to literally anything. But here's an interesting thing. The world government treats extreme weather as a political asset. They weaponize natural disasters, so the pitch is, Uranus isn't a single battleship parked in a garage. It's a climate or even orbital control system baked into the upper atmosphere, built by the ancient kingdom and now monopolized by Imu. Think less Pluton 2.0, and more root access to the planet's firmware. You don't sail Uranus, you log into it. NL accidentally speed ran this theory for us. He flies to the moon in a drum rocket balloon, finds ancient automata and a giant mural showing winged people from Burka and Shandora migrating between the moon and the blue planet. The tech there runs on endless Verth and electricity, which just so happened to be Enel's whole deal. That cover story reads like a dev diary. The sky and even space were once heavily engineered by a civilization that understood clouds, lightning, and gravity as a single programmable system. I want to emphasize how nasty that is in context. If the ancient kingdom scattered its infrastructure into 3 domains, sea kings, warships, and the literal sky grid, then Uranus is the last surviving piece of a global operating system. Imu isn't just pushing a red button, they're hijacking Joy Boy's cloud account, which retroactively reframes Lulusia. The world watched an ancient weapon fire and immediately filed it under freak weather event. The Void Century nightmare, one side hoarding a god-tier system that can delete countries at will, already happened. It's just back online quietly, while everyone argues about pirates. So if the sky itself is compromised, what does dawn of the world even look like when the ceiling can shoot you? The Poneglyph Network, ancient Wi-Fi for dangerous ideas. So if the sky itself can delete you, how do you fight back? You can't build a bigger laser. You build something the laser can't touch. a story that physically will not die. That's what the Poneglyph Network is. It's not just lore rocks. It's basically the ancient kingdom looking at the future and going, okay, they're going to win, they're going to lie, and everyone's memory is a mess. Cool, let's invent stone Wikipedia. Here's an interesting thing. The system has clear categories. Historical poneglyphs are the black boxes of the void century, logging events, names, and that one word O'Hara died for, the ancient kingdom's true name. Instructional poneglyphs are the how-to manuals, like the one in Alabasta pointing to Pluton's location, or the one on Fishman Island explaining the promise tied to Poseidon and Noah. And then you've got the road poneglyphs, the red endgame markers that, when combined, literally triangulate laugh-tail. 3 types, 1 distributed database, all pointing back to Joy Boy's unfinished idea. People like to say, it's just fantasy writing, calm down, to which I say, mate, this is a better backup strategy than most real governments have for their tax records. Because as far as design goes, it's genius. First, unbreakable stone. The world government can, Buster, call an island into vapor, but the slab is still sitting there like, cool fireworks anyway. Second, scattered locations. Skypia's bell, Alabasta's tombs, Zoo's whale tree, Wano's depths, Fishman Island's royal chamber. No single island holds the full truth, but each holds a shard. And to be fair, shard is underselling it, because the redundancy is deliberate. Multiple stones reference the same figures, weapons, and promises from different angles. You don't need 100% of them. You just need enough overlap to reconstruct the outline of the void century. It's error-tolerant world history. If O'Hara burns, Zoo still remembers. If Skypia falls, Wano still speaks. That's where the Kozuki clan come in. I want to emphasize that they're not just good stonemasons, they're the core dev team. Their secret script, their carving technique, their decision to embed messages across allied kingdoms, this is a trust web. Alabasta, Skypia, Zoo, Wano, Fishman Island, all agreed, at some point, to basically become Forbidden History hosting services. Each island is a node that said, we'll carry this crime into the future. How many kings signed that deal without fully understanding the blast radius? And then, 800 years of nothing. The network just sits there, powered off, while the world government quietly hunts any archaeology that looks a little too literate. Until Robin. Robin isn't just an archaeologist. She's the first successful user of this ancient Wi-Fi in 8 centuries. She logs into a system everyone else thinks is decorative. That's why the government is obsessed with her. They're not scared of a single woman. They're scared that the database finally has a reader again. So, if the stones are the hardware, and Robin is the first real client, who or what is acting as the server that ties all of this to the present war? O'Hara, the day history, fought back and lost. If the Poneglyph network is the server, O'Hara is the moment the admin tried to log in, and the government responded by smashing the entire data center with orbital lasers, because as far as crimes go, O'Hara's is hilariously mild. These are licensed archaeologists on a legal island, using legal methods, studying legal rocks. They're not summoning Uranus in the basement, they're literally reading. The problem is that their reading comprehension is too good. Once Clover and the crew start cross-referencing stones, tracing that 800-year gap, they get close enough to say the quiet part out loud. The ancient kingdom had a name. One word. That's all it takes for the world government to go, cool, time to exterminate the library. Here's an interesting thing. The Buster Call isn't framed as a tantrum, it's framed as policy. Spandine stands there with his smug little face and calls this justice, like erasing an island of civilians is just another Tuesday paperwork item. But the scale of the response completely outs them. You don't vaporize an entire culture because of a vague suspicion. You do it because you know the poneglyph system is real. You know it's a distributed backup of forbidden history, and you see one island getting too close to decoding the whole network. People sometimes say, "Oh, they overreacted," to which I say, "Mate, this isn't overreaction, this is panic. This is the regime realizing the checksum is about to be cracked. If O'Hara connects enough stones to reconstruct the ancient kingdom's name, its tech, its war with the 20, suddenly the current calendar, the empty throne, the entire power structure look like a 900-year-old PR stunt. You can't have that floating around in hardcover. And to be fair, they almost succeed. The tree of knowledge burns, the scholars die, the island sinks. Textbook authoritarian win, right? Except the story quietly flips the ledger. Jaguar D. Saul and the Giants haul cart after cart of books out of the fire and stash them on Elbaf. Robin survives as the last reader. Vegapunk, years later, visits that secret archive and basically gets a cheat sheet to the lost world. The government tried to delete a folder and accidentally created 3 backups. I want to emphasize how elegant this is as a long game. Out of O'Hara, you get a traumatized survivor whose entire identity is, "I will finish this work." A guilt-ridden genius who has seen the receipts and still works for the enemy. And an entire generation of giants growing up on bedtime stories like, "Tonight, kids, we're reading about the global coup your teachers said never happened." How do you put that back in the box? O'Hara is the day history fought back and lost on paper, but quietly won in redundancy. The server they tried to nuke respawned in Elbaf's libraries, in Vegapunk's brain, in Robin's will. And if that's true, then what happens when those 3 backups finally sync up with the present rebellion we're watching now? God Valley, the erased island. That explains everything. And the moment you ask what happens when those backups sync, the story quietly slides a bloody case study onto the table. God Valley. If O'Hara is the academic version of forbidden history, God Valley is the live ammo field test where that history bites back. Here's an interesting thing about God Valley. On paper, it's just a celestial dragon social event island, a rich people convention, a heavenly Met Gala, where the dress code is slavery. Then, in one single day, it becomes the battle royale of the century. Garp, still a vice admiral. Roger, not pirate king yet. Rox D. Zebek, the guy every Yonko is basically a DLC skin of, and in his crew, young Whitebeard, Big Mom, Kaido, Shiki, Stussy. It's literally a pre-Yonko character select screen, and, to be fair, that alone would make it important. But it's what happens after that screaming at us. The island doesn't just get classified, it vanishes from maps, from marine records, from public memory. God Valley is treated like a slur the world's operating system refuses to autocomplete. That's not how you handle a random pirate brawl. That's how you handle a void century echo glitching into the present. So, what was actually there? The series gives us 3 big categories of forbidden stuff: poneglyphs, ancient weapon breadcrumbs, and wrong bloodlines like buccaneers and lunarians. The celestial dragons were explicitly hunting humans that day. Kuma's buccaneer heritage is tied to God Valley. We've seen lunarians farmed at Punk Hazard, because as far as patterns go, the dragons treat rare races like living cheat codes, tied to some older power system. You can easily imagine a scenario where God Valley has a poneglyph fragment about Uranus, or a hidden shrine like Shandora's, or a concentrated population of a dangerous race. The dragons show up to exploit it. Rox shows up to steal it. Roger shows up because the voice of all things won't shut up. Garp shows up to stop the entire thing from becoming a Joy Boy speedrun in the wrong hands. People like to say, "Why would Garp ally with a pirate?" To which I say, have you met the Void Century? The whole ancient conflict reads like a group project where enemies keep teaming up because the alternative is the world literally exploding. Garp and Roger at God Valley are reenacting that same script. Two opposing ideals temporarily sinking to prevent Rox from grabbing whatever forbidden asset was on that island. I want to emphasize how much this mirrors O'Hara and Lulusia. O'Hara asks the wrong questions, Buster Call. Lulusia accidentally becomes a revolutionary staging ground, Sky Laser Delete. God Valley hosts a live demonstration of taboo history plus taboo power, and the response isn't spin the PR, it's remove the island from existence and pray the survivors shut up. And if you're thinking, okay, but what could be so bad it scares even Emu? The next island on our tour makes that question way less hypothetical. Lulusia and the return of Void Century. Tactics Lulusia is the moment the series looks you dead in the eye and says, "Oh, you thought God Valley was the ceiling," and then casually deletes the ceiling, the room, and the building from the map. We go from mysterious, erased island in the past to live broadcast war crime speedrun. And to be fair, that escalation is kind of insane. So, quick sequence check. Lulusia is a tiny kingdom, background NPC nation, the kind of place you expect to exist purely so a cover story has somewhere to stand. It gets tugged toward the revolutionaries. Its king is overthrown. We see Sabo literally on the island, and the whole thing starts flirting with open rebellion. That's already dangerous in a world where the calendar itself was rebooted after the Void Century. Then we cut to the room where history goes to die. Emu in the flower room, looking at a map, calmly circling Lulusia like they're doodling on a placemat. Next scene, some unknown power tears down from the sky, and the island is just gone. No debris, no flaming ruins, just negative space. Here's an interesting thing. The narrative makes sure the world is watching. The Navy intercepts the transmission. The Gorosei react. We as viewers see the blast from orbit and from the sea. This isn't O'Hara, where the cover story is, "Oh no, rogue scholars, Buster Call, tragic but legal." This isn't God Valley, where the solution is, "What island?" This time, there's not even the pretense of a system. No warships, no cannon fire, no natural disaster excuse. It's instantaneous erasure that looks wildly unnatural. People will say, maybe it was just some new Vegapunk satellite beam, to which I say, sure, and maybe Eni's lobby fell into a pothole. Because as far as visual language goes, that attack is framed like an ancient weapon flex. Sky-based, huge area, clean removal. We already know the three ancient weapons are a ship, a bloodline, and a god-tier force that can rewrite the world. Lulusia looks suspiciously like the third box being ticked on screen. I want to emphasize how different this is from O'Hara. Back then, the world government was doing defensive censorship. Scholars dig too deep into the Void Century, so they send a Buster Call, burn the books, and try to kill every witness. Horrific, but still operating inside the "we have rules. See, there are ships" cosplay. With Lulusia, the crime isn't uncovering taboo history. It's being near taboo people. A kingdom brushes up against the Revolutionary Army. Sabo maybe learns something he shouldn't, and the response is a preemptive ancient weapon-level smite. That shift matters because it signals the regime feels more threatened than ever. They're not just hiding the past, they're using the past's tools in real time. Same fear of ideas spreading, same willingness to sacrifice an entire population to keep one version of history in power, but now without the paperwork. It's void century tactics with HD live stream capability, and if the world government is comfortable pressing that button again, then the so-called dawn of the world stops being a cozy sunrise and starts looking a lot more like a wildfire. The question becomes, who actually controls the match, and how many islands have to vanish before the sun comes up? Whitebeard, Shanks, and the responsible emperors. So here's the cursed irony of the Yonko era. The two scariest men on the sea are also doing unpaid community management for the world government. Whitebeard and Shanks are basically the mod team for Pirate Reddit, and the Gorosei are fine with it because it keeps the subreddit from burning down. Let's start with Whitebeard, who is sold to us as the man closest to One Piece, to which I say, emotionally, sure, but politically, he's the man closest to a grumpy neighborhood mayor. Look at his territories. Fishman Island under Whitebeard? Safer than half the official world government kingdoms. People pay him tribute, and, in return, they get something the Marines only vaguely promise: stability. No slave raids, no random buster calls, no warlord doing a side quest. Just the giant dad with a medical drip saying, "Don't touch my kids." Here's an interesting thing. His personal code actually props up the status quo more than it threatens it. Whitebeard isn't trying to topple Mariajois. He's trying to recreate a family he lost. He doesn't chase ancient weapons. He doesn't hunt poneglyphs. He literally turns down Roger's offer to learn the true history, because as far as his dream is concerned, that information is irrelevant. You want a pirate who is powerful enough to break the world, but ideologically invested in keeping his corner of it the same. That's a dream world government client. Shanks is the weirder one, because he's a pirate with what is basically a diplomatic fast pass. This man walks into the Holy Land, into a room with the Gorosei, and they're like, "Oh, it's you. What balance-threatening topic did you book today?" That's not just clout. That feels like a modern echo of how the ancient kingdom might have negotiated. One powerful sea actor, not under the 20 kings, still granted audience when the global balance is wobbling. I want to emphasize how insane that is in universe. The Marines don't even know Emu exists, but Shanks can schedule a meeting with the top of the pyramid. Marineford is the case study where all of this snaps into focus. On paper, Whitebeard's war should have detonated the system. Yonko invades Marine HQ, warlords and admirals go all out, one ancient weapon rumor away from full Void Century cosplay. And to be fair, it is a mess. Whitebeard dies, Ace dies, the symbol of the old era is gone. But the war doesn't spiral into total collapse because Shanks hard resets the battlefield. He shows up, catches Akainu's punch, and basically says, "The era you wanted to end is over. Stop farming kills." The world government can live with that outcome. They've removed a symbol, proved deterrence, and the guy calling for peace is someone they already treat as a quasi-partner. This is where the Void Century echo gets loud. The original 20 kings didn't just win, they formed a wartime cartel. Shared enemies, shared rules, shared lies about history. In the modern version, the cartel quietly expands. A couple of responsible emperors are allowed to co-manage global order as long as they don't poke the calendar gap, the ancient weapons, or Joy Boy's promise. Whitebeard opts out of the truth. Shanks, suspiciously informed, works to freeze the board whenever it shakes too hard. But what happens when an emperor doesn't want in on the cartel at all, and instead wants to hijack the whole hidden system? That's where Blackbeard walks in, grinning like a modern, chaotic, emu-adjacent wildcard. And that's where we're going next. Blackbeard, the modern Void Century. Glitch Blackbeard is what happens when the Void Century doesn't stay in its lane. The world government spends 800 years trying to delete a save file, and this guy shows up like a bugged character model clipping through the map. We're told, very casually, that Teach never sleeps. That's not insomnia, that's a patch note. Normal humans need rest because the soul-body system is supposed to log off. Blackbeard doesn't. Then he eats 2 devil fruits and lives, which the story has screamed is impossible since Alabasta. Add in a Jolly Roger with 3 skulls and an obsession with the dark, dark fruit that pulls in powers and people, and you don't have a quirky pirate, you have a walking error message. And to be fair, the series keeps winking at this. Marco says Blackbeard's body is different. Shanks personally warns Whitebeard about him. The dark, dark fruit doesn't just control darkness, it cancels other devil fruits and drags their users into a kind of gravity coffin. That's not just edgy theming, that's an interface with the underlying code of how souls and powers attach to bodies. Because as far as we can tell, devil fruits are basically soul mods stapled onto flesh. Blackbeard is modding the mod. Here's an interesting thing. The Void Century research we glimpse is all about exactly this stuff. O'Hara dies for reading a stone about an ancient kingdom name. Mads plays with bloodlines. Vegapunk talks about the will of the people's wishes, creating the sea's curses. To which I say, a man who can house multiple powers is basically walking poneglyph fanfiction, the kind of OC that would have been cooked up in a lab when the ancient kingdom and the 20 kings were racing to weaponize souls, bodies, and inherited will. Look at how Teach behaves structurally. He joins Whitebeard not out of loyalty, but to camp a specific devil fruit spawn. He kills a commander, defects, and then uses the Shichibukai system as a legal speedrun into Impel Down. He weaponizes a world government institution to farm an endgame crew out of level 6 criminals, then immediately cashes out the warlord title once it's served its purpose. After Marineford, he loots Whitebeard's corpse for a second fruit and walks straight into a Yonko seat. That whole path is suspiciously familiar. The 20 kings didn't invent a world order. They hijacked an existing one, repurposed ancient weapons, rewrote the calendar, and sat a secret king on an empty throne. Blackbeard is running the same playbook on Fast Forward, except as one guy instead of 20 kingdoms. So what's his actual end game? Power, sure, but it feels like more than just, I want to sit where Kaido sat. His fruit lets him erase abilities, his body breaks the one-fruit rule, and his flag screams multiplicity. He's perfectly positioned to become a personal world reset button, a modern analog to the enemies that crushed the ancient kingdom, someone trying to overwrite the save file with his own corrupted version. If Joy Boy is the recurring promise of freedom, Blackbeard is the recurring glitch that tries to turn that freedom into monopolized chaos. Which raises the next question. If he's the chaos glitch, who's actually trying to be the ordered counterforce, the structured revolution against both Emu and Teach, that's where Dragon and the Revolutionary Army quietly step onto the board. Dragon and the Revolutionary Army the second war for history. If Blackbeard is the chaos glitch in the code, Dragon is the guy trying to uninstall the whole operating system, not just close a few tabs, not just delete your browser history, but rip out Windows World Government Edition and reinstall whatever the ancient kingdom was running. Because as far as targets go, the Revolutionary Army is weirdly picky. They're not actually at war with the Marines as a whole. They're not hunting pirates, and they're not just blowing up random islands for the aesthetic. Their real enemy is the celestial dragon system itself, the bloodline aristocracy, the Reverie puppet show, and, most importantly, the world government's monopoly on history and information. They're the only faction whose primary weapon isn't a devil fruit or an ancient ship, it's a leaked document. Here's an interesting thing. Dragon is perfectly positioned to reject literally every major ideology we've seen. He's Garp's son, so he grows up in the house of heroic marine justice. He's Luffy's dad, so narratively he's standing right next to the pirate fantasy of absolute freedom. And he looks at both, shrugs, and walks out. He doesn't want Garp's obedience to a corrupt system, and he doesn't want Roger-style piracy where you dance around that system. He's chasing that lost third option, the one the ancient kingdom seems to have represented before the Void Century got redacted. People sometimes say, well, he's just Pirate Joy Boy but with a cape, to which I say, no, he's closer to bureaucratic Joy Boy. He wants to change who writes the laws, who draws the maps, who decides which islands are acceptable to erase like O'Hara, God Valley, Lulusia. Luffy breaks cages. Dragon is trying to delete the concept of legal cages from the world. And to be fair, he knows he can't do that with one big anime war scream. The Revolutionary Army's actual strategy is slow, petty, and incredibly smart. They infiltrate kingdoms like Dressrosa and Goa, listen for local grievances, and then weaponize those against the world government. Instead of charging Marie-Joie with a fleet, they convince 10, 20, 30 countries to quietly stop paying the heavenly tribute. You don't need Pluton if you can make the tax base revolt. I want to emphasize how much of their power is about exposing things. Dragon gathers intel on slave routes, on Cypherpole Black Ops, on the fact that an entire island of scholars was burned because they found one forbidden word. When they move, it's often to broadcast a truth the Gorosei wanted buried. Their battles are as much about information leaks as explosions. That's why his inner circle looks like a Void Century restoration project. He pulls in O'Hara's survivors through Robin's connection. He elevates Sabo, a noble who literally woke up with his memory of oppression restored. And he trusts Bartholomew Kuma, a former king and Bible-reading idealist who volunteers to become a government weapon. This is Dragon trying to rebuild the intellectual and moral infrastructure the world government spent 800 years burning. Scholars, ethical kings, disillusioned nobles. And Kuma in particular is where this all stops being a fun theory game and turns into a gut punch, because the tyrant who became a pacifista is also the walking bridge between revolutionary ideals, world government science, and some very suspicious ancient technology. How do you topple a regime that can rewrite both bodies and memories? We'll get into exactly what they did to Kuma and why that inhuman experiment might be the key to resurrecting a very old idea of freedom. Bartholomew Kuma, human weapon, living archive. Kuma is what happens when the world's balance of power gets drunk and falls down the stairs. King, terrorist, government dog, and then Bluetooth Buddha with laser eyes. It sounds like a joke, but this one man is literally the collision point of all three great powers. So, Quick recap of the triple life. First, Bartholomew Kuma, king of the Sorbet Kingdom, a guy who was supposed to play the boring stability role in the world government script. Then he defects, becomes a Revolutionary Army commander under Dragon, quietly helping build the one organization designed to topple that script. Then, somehow, that same man signs up as a Shichibukai, an official attack dog of the regime he's trying to destroy. People call that a contradiction, to which I say, welcome to One Piece politics, where everyone is double or triple booked. But it only really gets wild once Vegapunk enters, because as far as deals with the devil go, Kuma's is bizarrely gentle. He voluntarily agrees to be turned into a pacifista prototype piece by piece. In exchange, Vegapunk programs one last act of will into the machine: protect the Thousand Sunny until the Straw Hats return. And he doesn't just scrap Kuma's mind, he literally backs it up, storing his memories like a hard drive made of trauma. Here's an interesting thing. That means even at his most obedient weapon phase, the system has a ghost in it by design. This is where the ancient tech vibes start screaming. The Pacifista Project and then the Seraphim are not just cool laser cyborgs. They're a mass-produced ancient weapon logic. You take rare bloodlines, Lunarian traits, warlord DNA, giants, buccaneers, run them through forbidden science, and spit out controllable serialized war assets. It's Pluton as a factory line instead of a single ship. Poseidon's talk to sea kings, swapped for obey a command chip. The world government keeps pretending the void century is gone, but their whole military R&D is basically fan fiction of that lost era. And to be fair, they almost pull it off with Kuma. They erase his personality, rewrite his body, parade him as a mindless symbol of fear. But then we get that brutal image, the tyrant crawling up the red line, bloodied, drawn by nothing but leftover habit and pain. That final pilgrimage, plus the stored memories, turns him into a walking, suffering poneglyph. A human stone, block the government tried to overwrite, whose very existence still records. This is what your order does to those who resist. I want to emphasize how risky the revolutionary bet is here. Dragon and Ivankov are gambling that inherited will can survive even total erasure, that somewhere, in those archived memories, or that final programmed act, Kuma's ideals will outlast his body. It's Joy Boy logic scaled down to one man. Even if you lose this round, the record of your resistance becomes fuel for the next generation. And the guy making all of this possible, the one who turns ancient ideas into modern nightmares, is Vegapunk. If Kuma is the human poneglyph, Vegapunk is the archaeologist of science, quietly decoding and repackaging the past, which, conveniently, is exactly why our next stop has to be the old man with the apple head and the brain big enough to bridge 900 missing years. Vegapunk, the man who reinvented forbidden science. Vegapunk is what happens when you let a Void Century wiki editor speedrun godhood with grant money. The man basically looked at 900 years of forbidden tech, hit remix, and somehow made the world government pay for the album. So, what has he actually done? We've got the Pacifista, which are already terrifying. Laser-spamming Kuma clones reverse-engineered from Kizaru's light and ancient metallurgy. Then he upgrades that mistake into the Seraphim, child weapon hybrid stuffed with Lunarian traits, Seraphim authority chips, and stolen warlord blueprints. Add in artificial devil fruits from Momo's Oops! It's actually the Nika model dragon to Smile's body horror gotcha, and you start to see a pattern. This isn't random mad science. It's a systematic attempt to recreate a lost power system at industrial scale. And that's before we even hit his energy obsession. Vegapunk wants a world where clean, free energy exists for everyone, which sounds like TED Talk material until you remember the last civilization that tried global infrastructure got erased from the calendar. He literally taps into some mysterious fire of the gods energy, the same kind that made Lunarians walking natural disasters. People say, well, that's just standard sci-fi, to which I say, standard sci-fi doesn't get your island buster called. Here's an interesting thing. Egghead itself is basically ancient kingdom cosplay. We have island-wide climate control domes, holograms you can punch, sky roads, food printers, and a giant iron robot from 900 years ago shambling around like someone forgot to uninstall the beta. Vegapunk's brain is so big, he has to literally externalize it into a giant Apple-Punk hard drive, then partition himself into 6 satellite bodies. That's not just quirky character design. That's a one-man attempt to recreate a distributed civilization, a networked consciousness, the exact kind of vague, hyper-advanced mess the poneglyphs keep hinting at. And I want to emphasize the moral part, because as far as character writing goes, Vegapunk is quietly brutal. He works for the world government, builds their weapons, takes their budget, smiles for their propaganda shots. At the same time, he's the guy who respected O'Hara enough to salvage their books from the lake, move them to Elbaf, and keep reading. He knows the name of the ancient kingdom. He understands why the poneglyphs exist. He still signs the checks that fund Seraphim development. Is that survival, cowardice, strategy? Probably all three. That tension explodes when he finally tries to broadcast the void century truth to the whole world. The scientist who enabled the regime also becomes the most dangerous whistleblower on the planet. And to be fair, that makes him as threatening to Immu as any ship-sized cannon, because his existence proves the science of that erased era isn't gone. It's just monopolized and weaponized. Which raises the uncomfortable question: if Vegapunk can reconstruct this much from scraps and stolen books, what did the originals actually build? The Pacifista are knockoffs. The Seraphim are prototypes. The energy research is a rediscovery. The real ancient weapons never needed a lab coat, and they never left. So next, we have to talk about Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus. The world reset buttons that didn't get deleted, only hidden. Ancient weapons revisited, blueprints, bloodlines, and sky cannons. So when we say ancient weapons, it sounds like 3 random nukes. But as far as one-piece geopolitics goes, this is the entire operating system. These aren't just big guns. They're 3 different ways of rewriting who owns the sea, the land, and the sky all at once. Quick recap so we're on the same vague page. Pluton is the physical monster, a super warship tied to Wano's buried hull and Water 7's blueprints, a ship that's basically, what if a country was also artillery? Poseidon is the opposite, a person, the mermaid princess who can literally command sea kings, turning every calm belt into her private navy. And Uranus is the weird one, probably a sky or orbital weapon, implied by Immu casually deleting Lulusia like they were clearing browser history. Here's an interesting thing. Those are 3 different mediums: metal, bloodline, and whatever orbital god laser Uranus is. That feels less like random cool ideas and more like the ancient kingdom doing threat modeling. If your enemy captures one ship, fine. If they kidnap one princess, tragic but survivable. If they find one floating doomsday satellite, still not game over. The reset button only works when all three are pressed together. So, they scatter the keys. Pluton's key is intellectual, the blueprints in Water 7, the physical hull sealed under Wano. Poseidon's key is genetic, the title that reincarnates every few centuries in a single mermaid. Uranus's key is spatial, a secret location and mechanism only a handful of people like Imu and the Gorosei even know exists. 3 different security systems that the world government has been trying to crack for 800 years and still doesn't fully control, which is honestly kind of embarrassing for a group that rewrote the calendar. Because as far as Imu is concerned, the nightmare isn't one weapon going rogue. We've already seen they can overwrite an island with a sky laser and go back to gardening. The real terror is convergence. Pluton raised, Poseidon awakened, Uranus hijacked, all under a single Joy Boy successor who also owns the story. I want to emphasize that last part. Power without narrative is just terrorism. Power with the true history of the Void Century behind it? That's regime change. People like to say, well, even if Luffy gets one weapon, the world government still has the others, to which I say, mate, you're assuming the ancient kingdom didn't design these to resonate. Think about it. A ship meant to sail a reconfigured world, a mermaid meant to move the sea kings that tow Noah, and a sky weapon that literally redraws maps. That's not 3 random nukes. That's a coordinated world layout editor. And to be fair, Imu is right to panic, because who is accidentally speedrunning this assembly quest? The guy with Wano's loyalty, a mermaid princess bestie, a shipwright who read Pluton's blueprints, a crewmate from the sky, and alliances with Fishman Island and Alabasta? So next we have to ask, how close is Luffy's current network to rebooting the ancient kingdom's full system without even realizing it? The Straw Hats as an unwitting ancient weapons coalition. So here's the cursed joke of it all. If you drew a conspiracy board of ancient weapons, you wouldn't get Imu or the Gorosei or some secret lab. You'd get the Thousand Sunny with red string going to half the map like it's accidentally cosplaying a doomsday device. And to be fair, that's kind of what's happening, because look at this mess of a friend group. Nico Robin is literally the last functioning interface for the Poneglyph operating system. She can read the Void Century patch notes the world government tried to uninstall with fire. Frankie? This man had the Pluton blueprints sitting in his chest like a USB drive, memorized them, then burned the physical copy. Jinbei gives Luffy political capital with Fishman Island, the place physically parked over Poseidon's berth. Shirahoshi herself is Poseidon, an ancient weapon that's also just a shy girl who cries a lot. And then we keep throwing the crew at sky islands and mysterious beams of light, which, here's an interesting thing, is probably our Uranus breadcrumb trail. Skypea, Birka, Enel's space graffiti, that God Valley-looking shadow in the Lulusia blast, the random lights from the heavens that erase islands from the map. This is not subtle. The Straw Hats are repeatedly standing under the same sky-based murder system that once helped rewrite the world's geography, and they treat it like weird weather. Now, pattern time. The ancient kingdom is rumored to have been this umbrella protector of different races and regions. Giants, fishmen, sky people, the whole global weirdos club. What does Luffy do over and over? He rolls up, punches the local tyrant, and then leaves behind a liberated island that now owes him its life. Alabasta, Dressrosa, Fishman Island, Wano, even places like Skypea and Zoo. He's rebuilding a network of grateful, diverse nations without ever saying the phrase foreign policy. I want to emphasize how much this mirrors that old system. You have Wano, closed off, but secretly harboring Pluton and a samurai culture tied to Joy Boy's last stand. You have Fishman Island, sitting on Noah, the Sea Kings, and Poseidon's bloodline. You have Alabasta, the one founding family that refused to go to Maria Joie, sitting on Pluton's legend and void century secrets. Luffy isn't just friends with them. He's their chosen champion. He unseals Wano's future, protects Fishman Island's prophecy, saves Alabasta's royal line. That's all three ancient weapon threads, and he does it while loudly not caring about the weapons at all. People like to say, Luffy's not an ancient weapon, to which I say, mate, he's worse. Because as far as the world government is concerned, a single cannon you can point and shoot is manageable. A coalition of kingdoms, races, and living superweapons emotionally bonded to one rubber idiot? That's unpatchable. The real ancient weapon is the friend group we made along the way, and that's not just a meme. It's the exact multi-pronged power structure the first Joy Boy ran, quietly rebooting itself. And the terrifying part is this coalition doesn't just echo the ancient kingdom. It also reactivates the other banned feature of the world, the Will of D. So next we have to ask, what happens when this network of islands and weapons is led by a guy whose middle initial is literally the world's biggest red flag? The Will of D in the modern era. From quiet initial to open rebellion. Because as far as red flags go, the Will of D is basically a walking, talking OSHA violation. The world government has spent 800 years trying to delete one letter of the alphabet, and that letter keeps showing up on wanted posters, Navy rosters, and in the middle of history shattering smiles. So we need to track how this D thing goes from quiet middle initial to full-on ideological malware running against the world's operating system. Here's an interesting thing. When we list the modern Ds, it's not just main character and some guys. We've got Gold D. Roger, the pirate king who literally triggered the Great Pirate Era by weaponizing his own execution. Monkey D. Luffy, our rubber-brained chaos engine. Trafalgar D. Waterlaw, emo surgeon who accidentally speedruns the collapse of the warlord system. Marshall D. Teach, Blackbeard, walking disaster patch that breaks every pirate rule. Jaguar D. Saul, a Marine vice admiral who defects to protect O'Hara's books. And hanging around the edges, Monkey D. Garp, who isn't a D. Problem to which I say, sure, and Eni's lobby isn't a security risk. Each of them hits a different pillar of the world. Roger sails to Laugh Tale, reads the poneglyphs, and exposes that the void century is not just a gap, it's a crime scene. He doesn't publish the logs, but he flips the table by proving the ancient kingdom story is still reachable. Luffy is more blunt force. He topples tyrants and fake gods on repeat, from Enel's I Am God cosplay to Doflamingo's underground puppet state, to the Yonko system itself. His power isn't just punching, it's creating new alliances that ignore the world government's categories. Law quietly attacks the legal scaffolding. By taking down Doflamingo and helping trigger the Reverie Crisis, he helps dismantle the Shichibukai, a core stabilizer in the three great powers system. Blackbeard, meanwhile, is the chaos update no one asked for. He murders a Yonko, steals a Logia, weaponizes Impel Down, and turns the Yonko balance into a vague mess. He's not rebelling against the world government out of morality. He's just proof that the Will of D doesn't guarantee good guy, a Mwada only system breaker. And I want to emphasize the death smiles, because that's where this stops being just politics and starts feeling metaphysical. Roger smiles at his execution. Ace smiles as he dies protecting Luffy. Saul laughs through an O'Hara Buster call. Even Luffy, brushing up against death at Marineford or Impel Down, treats it like an accepted cost. What kind of worldview laughs at its own erasure? It's like they've all pre-downloaded the patch notes. Individual life is expendable. The inherited mission isn't. So maybe D isn't a royal bloodline. It's a distributed ideological virus from the ancient kingdom. Not everyone who carries it is biologically related, but they all run a similar firmware. Instinctive defiance of imposed order, attraction to ancient truths, refusal to bow to gods. The world government burned O'Hara to stop one word, the ancient kingdom's name. Yet that same will keeps respawning in kids from Dawn Island, Flevance, and a random giant in the Marines. You can exterminate islands like God Valley and Lulucia, but you can't quite uninstall the D. And if that's true, then the real final war isn't just pirates versus Marines. It's this 800-year-old idea crashing straight into Imu's secret reign. What happens when the world's most contagious middle initial finally looks the invisible king in the eye? Races on the red line. Lunarians, buccaneers, and the cost of being too ancient. And the thing about an invisible king is, you don't just hide yourself, you start hiding whole species. If the D are the world's bugged save file, then races like the Lunarians and Buccaneers are the leftover debug tools Oda forgot to delete, and the world government is desperately trying to uninstall, so Lunarians first. These guys used to literally be worshipped as gods, living on the red line, with black wings, white hair, and permanent fire mode like they're walking Entei ROM hacks. They control flame. They're absurdly resilient. And to be fair, King kind of demonstrates that by tanking stuff that should delete most commanders. The kicker is the government's bounty, not on their heads, but on information. Report any intel on a Lunarian, you get paid. Who does that unless the mere knowledge of a race is treated as contraband history? Because as far as world-building goes, that's wild. You're not just erasing a people, you're patching out the idea that they ever existed. Lunarians are tied to the red line itself, to an earlier sky ecosystem that predates the current map, and that screams, "We were here before your calendar started." I want to emphasize how aggressive that is. They didn't just wipe the Lunarian homeland, they turned the survivors into lab material under the Vinsmokes and Kaido. Then you've got the Buccaneers, who are almost the opposite flavor of the same crime. They're not fire gods. They're giant-coated humans with this inherited sense of ancient duty. Kuma's flashback makes it sound like being Buccaneer means you're born remembering a promise you never personally made. That's horrifying. Imagine popping out of the womb with a vague compulsion to help Joy Boy patch a 900-year-old update. And to which I say, of course those people become prime targets. The world government doesn't just enslave Buccaneers for their size. They dissect them, experiment on them, and in Kuma's case, turn that inherited duty into a literal, weaponized pacifist cyborg. It's the same move as with Lunarians. If you can't fully erase, you repurpose. You turn living relics of the old world into hardware for the new regime. Here's an interesting thing. This pattern keeps echoing. Giants from Elbaf are sitting on ancient warrior culture and probably void century war stories. Fishmen and merfolk inherit Noah, Poseidon, and a whole theology about the sun and the surface that predates the world government's rule. Skypians and Shandians literally live on stolen land with poneglyphs and lost sky tech. Every one of these groups is carrying a fragment of the pre-red line, pre-world government ecosystem, whether that's cultural, technological, or straight-up mythological. So, The rule of thumb becomes pretty clear. The closer your race sits to the original world layout, or the ancient kingdom's operating system, the more the government either hunts you down or plugs you into a weapon project. Lunarians, exterminated and studied. Buccaneers, enslaved and turned into PX units. Giants, courted for marine power. Fishmen, ghettoized under Maria Joie. Skypeans, nuked by Enel and quietly forgotten by the surface. And if all of that feels like a scattered mess of tragedies, Oda quietly ties a bunch of them to one missing map point, God Valley. Lunarians on the red line, buccaneers in chains, celestial dragons visiting for fun, a kingdom that vanishes, and a whole island scrubbed from history. What kind of place has to disappear for this many ancient races and secrets to intersect there? God Valley and the geography of erasure. So God Valley is basically what happens when the world government looks at an island and goes, "Yeah, that's a bug in the timeline. Delete the save." It's not just a mystery island. It's a live demo of how the map itself is part of their censorship machine. Let's reconstruct what we actually know, because as far as canonical crumbs go, Oda gave us a whole tragic charcuterie board here. God Valley was a celestial dragon hunting ground, which already tells you it's not a normal island. This is the Maria Joie vacation package. Bring your nobles, bring your slaves, shoot some sentient beings for sport. We've got buccaneers dragged there, we've got a mass slave event, and in the middle of that horror show, you suddenly have the Rock's pirates, Roger's crew, and Garp all colliding. The so-called hero of the Marines gets his title by teaming up with the future pirate king to protect celestial dragons and their property. That is such a PR mess that you can practically hear the Gorosei asking, "Can we just pretend the whole island never existed?" Here's an interesting thing. That's basically what happens. After the battle, God Valley literally disappears from the map. Not people stopped visiting, not it declined economically. Gone. This mirrors Ohara so hard, it's kind of uncomfortable. Ohara pieces together the name of the ancient kingdom, and the response is a buster call plus demon-level firepower to erase the island, its people, and its books. Lulusia dares to become a revolutionary sympathetic kingdom. Emu looks at a map, circles it with a pen, and a light from the sky deletes it like it was never there. So when people say, "Maybe God Valley just sank naturally," to which I say, "Sure," and Lulusia just tripped and fell into a divine laser, the pattern is too clean. Critical sight appears, starts exposing the ugliest secrets of the world government, void century research, slave systems, the truth about the celestial dragons, Joy Boy echoes, and suddenly we're testing what is probably Uranus in live combat. The same vague sky death that wipes Lulusia feels like a refined version of whatever erased God Valley. I want to emphasize how systemic this is. Ohara threatens the historical narrative, burn it. God Valley threatens the moral narrative, vanish it. Lulusia threatens the political narrative, space nuke it. Each time the island isn't just destroyed, it's removed from public knowledge. Maps are updated, records are scrubbed, survivors are scattered and silenced. The world's geography is literally a redacted document. And to be fair, if you have to keep deleting whole islands to maintain peace, that peace is not a stable build. It's a glitchy save file that keeps corrupting whenever someone loads the truth side quest. Every erased island is a crash log. The funny part is, you can only play whack-a-mole with continents for so long. You can vaporize God Valley, you can burn Ohara, You can laser Lulucia, but there's one island they really can't just delete without bricking the whole system, the Holy Land itself. Maria Joie is the final boss of this geography of erasure, a monument literally built on top of stolen history. And next, we need to talk about what's buried under that perfect white city. Maria Joie, palace built on a tomb. So Maria Joie isn't just the capital of the world. It's the world's biggest grave marker cosplaying as Versailles. People call it the Holy Land, to which I say, holy what, exactly? Because as far as we can tell, it's literally sitting on a crime scene with better lighting. Geographically, this place is already cheating. It's perched on top of the Red Line at the exact crossing point of the Grand Line and the Calm Belts, the one vertical spine you can't sail around. You've got the bubble lift from Fishman Island, the gates of justice, the whole logistics system of the Marines and the government radiating outward from this one cliff. And then, on top of that spine, they carve it up into neat little class zones, sprawling celestial dragon estates with their glass bubbles and slave parades, then Pangea Castle looming behind them, and buried inside that, the empty throne chamber that is very loudly, symbolically empty, while a very real crypt goblin sits on it. Here's an interesting thing. The closer you get to the center of Maria Joie, the more abstract it becomes. The outer ring is just rich people suburbs. Then you move inward, and it turns into this giant palace named after the supercontinent Pangea, as if they're claiming the whole planet as their front yard. At the core is a room that pretends no one rules, surrounded by 20 swords from the equal founding kings, while Emu literally climbs the steps. It's not subtle. It's propaganda architecture. The world's vertical center is being used to say, all seas, all races, all histories are beneath us, and the building itself keeps repeating that idea. And to be fair, that would already be a lot. But then we go under the palace. The Reverie Emu scene drops us into this frozen vault with the giant straw hat and what looks like an ancient, damp stone chamber. This isn't just a fun horror set piece. It strongly implies that Maria Joie is built on top of an older city, probably tied to the ancient kingdom that O'Hara died trying to name. The hat is Joy Boy-coded, D-Clan-coded, all the enemy of the gods imagery stuffed into one oversized accessory and shoved in a fridge. It's the series quietly saying, the Holy Land is literally constructed over someone else's culture. I want to emphasize how evil genius that is as a power move. Maria Joie is not a capital in the normal sense. Nobody's from there except the victors. It's a permanent victory monument, a daily reminder that the void century ended the way the celestial dragons wanted. Every generation born under that shadow just grows up with the empty throne myth, the Red Line as an unquestioned wall, and the idea that the world's center has always looked like this. You don't even have to censor history that hard if the landscape itself is lying for you. But monuments crack, and the funny thing about building your whole system on a vertical spine is that if someone blows up the spine, say the promised destruction of the Red Line from Fishman Island's prophecy, your eternal victory statue suddenly has to deal with gravity. So next, we need to talk about the people literally living under Maria Joie's feet, and why the first real fault line might be opening up from the ocean floor. Fishman Island and the Red Line's expiration date. So if the Red Line is the spine, Fishman Island is the herniated disc the story keeps poking. Because buried under all that candy coating and royal drama is one of the oldest unpaid debts in the series, Joy Boy's promise. Way back in the Void Century, Joy Boy makes a deal with the people of the sea. He's going to bring them to the surface, end their second-class status, literally change where they live in the world. And he fails. How do we know? Because he carves the most awkward "my bad" in history onto a poneglyph, apologizing to Poseidon and the fishmen for not keeping his word. You don't write a 1,000-year stone apology unless the original idea was massive. And right above that apology, like Chekhov's battleship, sits Noah's Ark, a gigantic ancient ship parked under Fishman Island, explicitly described as something to be used when that day finally comes. Here's an interesting thing. Oda doesn't tell us what the original plan for Noah was, but he shows us the pieces. Poseidon is a mermaid princess who can command sea kings. Noah is a ship sized for sea kings to tow. The promise is about moving an entire people. Put those together, and what do you get? A mass migration mechanic baked into the world's power system, just on cooldown for 900 years. Then Madame Shyarly walks in and drops the doomsday prophecy. She sees Luffy destroying Fishman Island, not attacking it, not threatening it. Literally, the island gone. Fans freaked out, to which I say, yeah, that's kind of the point. Because as far as long-term storytelling goes, you don't stack Joy Boy's failure, an unfinished arc, and a hyper-specific vision of destruction unless you're planning to cash all of that out in a tectonic way. And to be fair, Shyarly's visions are never wrong. So the trick isn't, does Luffy blow it up? It's, what has to break for that destruction to actually be salvation? If Fishman Island is sitting in a hollow under the red line, and the red line falls, what happens? The ceiling collapses, the island dies, but Noah and the Sea Kings ferry everyone away. The prophecy is fulfilled, Joy Boy's promise is finally kept, and the red line, the vertical prison bar of the map, gets deleted. I want to emphasize how insane that is on a geographic level. Knock out the red line, and suddenly the four blues aren't four. The calm belts stop being these weird natural border walls. You get something much closer to a unified sea, the legendary all-blue that Sanji's been ranting about since Bharati stops being a fairy tale and starts being a literal oceanographic side effect. The world government's entire control system relies on choke points. Marie-Joie, the Holy Land, the only safe elevator between halves of the Grand Line. Remove the elevator shaft, and their monopoly on movement breaks overnight. And this is where it stops feeling like just Fishman Island lore and starts feeling like endgame architecture. Joy Boy's apology, Noah's waiting hull, Shyarly's vision, the red line's awkward placement, the ancient weapons all being about world-scale change. These are not separate trivia cards. They're all circling one giant reset event, the promised dawn of the world, where the map, the sky, and the power structure get rewritten in one shot. So the real question isn't, will the red line fall? It's who's holding the trigger. Poseidon, Uranus, or the next Joy Boy himself? And what kind of world actually rises with that dawn? Approaching dawn, echoes of the First Great War. And here's the uncomfortable part. That trigger is being fought over right now, in slow motion, by a world that's quietly reenacting the Void Century with worse fashion and better bounty posters. Because as far as stability goes, the three great powers are a corpse we're still propping up weekend at Bernie's style. The Shichibukai? Abolished? That entire pillar of legalized pirate warlords just got yanked, sending guys like Mihawk and Hancock back into the wild. The Yonko seats keep musical chairing between Whitebeard, Blackbeard, Shanks, Big Mom, Kaido, Luffy, Buggy of all people. The Revolutionary Army is done LARPing in the shadows and is now openly attacking Reverie and rescuing Kuma. And the world government's response is island erasure. Lulucia didn't just sink. It got deleted from the map like a misclicked save file. Here's an interesting thing. That exact pattern is what we'd expect if the original Void Century War never actually ended. On one side, you have Imu and the Gorosei, sitting on Uranus-tier sky lasers and a censorship fetish. That's the winning coalition from 800 years ago, still clinging to a fear-based system where order means we can literally smite you from orbit. On the other side, we've got a very messy, very familiar cast filling in the old roles. Luffy is obviously the Joy Boy successor slot, the rubbery chaos agent with the ancient weapon ally, Poseidon via Shirahoshi, the Nika fruit, and friendships across every persecuted race. Blackbeard is the opportunistic Dark Mirror, the guy who weaponizes the pirate era, the way the world government once weaponized the ancient weapons. Dragon is basically running the rebooted Ancient Kingdom Coalition, a decentralized, pluralistic network of kingdoms and races trying to topple a central sky-based aristocracy. Vegapunk is the O'Hara plus Ancient Kingdom brain, the scientist who actually understands the old world's tech level and is trying to make it public instead of proprietary. Imu is the continuity error that isn't an error, a living fossil of the original tyrant, the personification of "we never stopped ruling." I want to emphasize, the dawn of the world isn't just a poetic sunrise that makes everyone feel better about slavery. It's a structural reset. The last time, the world government used the ancient weapons to redraw the entire map, slam up the red line, bury an entire century, and restart the calendar at year one. The dawn is that same world-editing power being pointed the other way, toward breaking the red line, reconnecting the seas, and replacing a top-down terror state with something closer to the ancient kingdom's pluralistic, multi-race federation. People talk like we're heading toward the final war, to which I say we're actually watching the sequel to a war that never got its ending. It just got redacted. O'Hara tried to roll the credits and got burned. Lulucia asked the wrong question and got erased. Egghead is Vegapunk literally leaking the spoiler script. So the real tension now isn't, will there be a big battle? It's who finishes the story this time, Joy Boy's inheritors or the editor-in-chief of reality. And next, we're going to start mapping how that second dawn might actually unfold on the board we have, without spoiling which pieces fall first, rewinding the tape, the true timeline of the world. So let's actually rewind the tape, because as far as mental models go right now, we've got a 900-year war filed under vague mess. We're going to speed-run the entire history of the One Piece world in about a minute, then slow it back down. History in 60 seconds. Ready? Pre-Void Century. We've got scattered ancient civilizations. Shandora in the sky, early Wano, Fishman Island, the Lunarians up on the red line. Different races, different tech, but one idea starts to dominate: the ancient kingdom. This is the Joy Boy side. Advanced science, alliances with fishmen, giants, probably even those weird robot builders who made the Iron Giant. They create or centralize the ancient weapons. Pluton as a ship, Poseidon as a bloodline, Uranus as a sky god button. That's not flavor. That's a world reset system divided into hardware, software, and admin privileges. Void Century hits. The 20 kingdoms freak out about this rising power and its too-free ideology, war. The ancient weapons are either deployed or threatened. Joy Boy makes the promise to Fishman Island, tied to Noah and the coming of a new dawn, and then fails. The ancient kingdom is wiped, its name literally turned into a redacted spoiler. The winners do something insane. They don't just win, they restart the calendar, build the red line order we know, and found the world government with an empty throne that is only empty if you ignore the immortal boss sitting on it. I want to emphasize how hard the system overcorrects here. The celestial dragons move to Maria Joie, the great cleansing of history begins, and the poneglyphs become illegal patch notes from the deleted timeline. The ancient weapons are scattered, Pluton buried under Wano, Poseidon locked into Shirahoshi's bloodline, Uranus tied to Emu's little delete island sky scribbles. Fast forward. For 800 years, you get a fake piece with periodic glitches. O'Hara decodes enough poneglyphs to say the ancient kingdom's name out loud, to which I say, of course the response is a buster call plus a tree-melting laser. God Valley? Rox tries to grab celestial dragons and possibly an ancient weapon or related secret, and the world government quietly nukes the island from the archive. Fisher Tiger climbs the red line, burns Maria Joie brands, and the fishman hate cycle spikes again. Lulucia gets too close to Sabo, the revolution, and the truth, and a literal hole in the sky erases it. Different centuries, same pattern. Someone approaches the old save file. The system hard resets them. Then we hit the modern pivots. God Valley is the switch from rock-style chaotic supremacy to the Yonko era, where four monsters unofficially balance each other so the government doesn't have to. O'Hara is the shift from passive censorship to surgical erasure of any historian with a brain cell. Marineford is the breakpoint where inherited wills, Rogers, Whitebeards, Joy Boys start openly hijacking the script. So, the present, post-Marineford, post-Lulucia world, that's not a fresh start. It's late-stage endgame of a 900-year unfinished war. Joy Boy's side lost the body, but the ideas survived in bloodlines, poneglyphs, and that annoying human habit of not shutting up about freedom. Next, we're going to plug this whole timeline into the three great powers on the board right now, so you can actually use this history as a battle map instead of a trivia dump. Three great powers, one old war, how the void century never ended. So when the story tells you three great powers, it sounds very clean and game-balanced, right? To which I say, that's not a balance. That's three different answers to a 900-year-old problem awkwardly duct-taped together so the world doesn't immediately explode. Because, as far as the world government is concerned, they already won. They're not a neutral UN. They're the winning coalition of the void century that just never clocked out. Those emergency wartime powers? The right to erase islands like O'Hara or Lulucia on a maybe-they-know-too-much basis, that's not a bug. That's the original feature fossilized into law. The empty throne is literally propaganda pasted over Emu's continued existence. Like if your boss insisted the CEO was a concept while still sending you emails. But that victory created a mess. You can't rule the whole globe directly, especially the New World, which is basically the ocean's Florida. So the Yonko system grows in that vacuum. Officially, the world government hates them. Structurally, it's kind of perfect. Instead of endlessly garrisoning the most chaotic seas, you outsource the violence to four regional monsters who keep each other in check. It's the 20 kingdoms all over again. Share the burden of suppressing whatever's left of the ancient kingdom's influence. Just now, the kings are Big Mom, Kaido, Shanks, Blackbeard. Here's an interesting thing. Pirates and revolutionaries get lumped together a lot, but they're built completely differently. Most pirates chase territory, treasure, or just vibes. The Revolutionary Army is going after the wiring in the walls. They target kingdoms' tax systems, slave economies, communication lines, not because they want that land, but because those are the load-bearing beams of the post-Void Century order. Dragon is basically speed-running what the ancient kingdom tried. Change the structure, not just the faces on the wanted posters. I want to emphasize that Joy Boy's camp probably had this same split. On one side, freedom without structure people. Modern pirates, Luffy types, Sun pirates, who blow up oppression on contact, but don't stick around to write constitutions. On the other, freedom through systemic change. Modern revolutionaries, Robin, Sabo, even guys like Fujitora, who want institutions that can survive a bad day. And then, looming over both, the world government, as weaponized fear of that freedom ever existing again. Now map that onto the ancient weapons. Poseidon is alliances and empathy with oppressed races. Shirahoshi literally talking to sea kings, bridging species. That's the revolutionary playbook, and, weirdly, Luffy's too. Pluton is overwhelming destructive deterrence, a Wano-built don't-touch-me ship. That's the Yonko aura, the idea that if you poke Kaido's territory, an entire island disappears. Uranus is global-level control or terror, whatever Imu used to delete Lelouch from the map, which is exactly how the world government keeps everyone vaguely obedient without explaining anything. So, the three great powers are just a reskinned Void Century stalemate. Nobody can move openly without risking ancient weapon-level escalation. The government pushes too hard. Poseidon-style alliances surge. A Yonko gets Pluton-tier leverage. Everyone panics. Uranus fires once, and every serious player remembers why the calendar starts at year 0. And to be fair, this is where it gets spicy. The truly conservative faction might actually be the Revolutionary Army. They want to reform the system without fully unleashing those lost tools. No full Joy Boy reset button, just a safer operating system. But what happens when the weapons, the bloodlines, and the blueprints stop waiting politely? That's where we go next. Ancient weapons as policy tools. Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus in the modern era. So when we say the weapons, the bloodlines, and the blueprints stop waiting politely, we're basically saying the world's nuclear policy is written in crayon on a poneglyph. People treat the ancient weapons like vague myth bombs, to which I say, no, they're a 3-part policy toolkit that never got properly sunsetted, because as far as the story is concerned, each weapon maps onto a different lever of control. Poseidon is environmental and alliance-based power, command of the Sea Kings, control over currents, and, by extension, every trade route and underwater nation. Pluton is classic military deterrence, a ship or fleet designed to say, attack us, and everyone dies. Uranus is the global fear button, the thing that can literally erase a country from the sky with no warning. That's not just firepower, that's a governance model. Here's an interesting thing. The narrative keeps telling us the weapons themselves are less important than who can credibly threaten or block them. That's why we get this weird triangle of blueprints, bloodlines, and locations. Tom's ship blueprints for Pluton, the Royal Mermaid bloodline that occasionally spits out a Poseidon, and whatever Imu is sitting on in the Holy Land for Uranus. The system isn't who owns the gun, it's who can prove they could pull the trigger and who can prove they could stop it. That's why CP0 and the 5 Elders freak out at information Not just explosions. Take Pluton and Wano. Wano is literally a lockbox, a country with mountain walls, closed borders, and a giant natural dry dock hiding a world-ending deterrent. The isolation isn't just cultural, it's arms control. As long as the borders stay shut, Pluton is technically there but off the board. The second you open Wano, you get sea access, trade, and also Oops, a legendary battleship that every major power suddenly has to factor into their spreadsheets. Of course, the world government is terrified of that political unlock screen. Now Poseidon. Shirahoshi is a living diplomatic superweapon. Her real strength isn't, I can crush ships with sea kings. It's that she can unite sea kings, fishmen, and potentially every marginalized oceanic force under one will. Imagine a world where Fishman Island, the Noah, and the Sea Kings coordinate a global blockade. No shipping, no safe routes, no marine mobility. That's not just violence, that's leverage at every reverie. Uranus is trickier, but the clues are loud. Imu's sky-based attack, Lulucha vanishing like it never existed, and the way everyone treats the empty throne as theater all point to a weapon that enforces peace through invisible terror from above. You don't rebel if you think God can delete your island between panels. It's basically the world's worst neighborhood watch program. And to be fair, the present-day plot keeps orbiting these nodes. CP0 in Wano, CP0 on Fishman Island. Reverie talks about relocating the fishmen to the surface, where they're easier to monitor. The five elders panicking over any poneglyph-related leak. The map of important places is just a heat map of ancient weapon adjacency. So, what if the real endgame isn't firing these things, but making them obsolete? I want to emphasize that Joy Boy's alternative might be a world where you don't need sky lasers or god mermaids to feel safe. How do you outplay a 1,000-year terror system without pressing the red buttons yourself? That's exactly where we're headed next, into inherited will and the idea of a different kind of reset. Races, islands, and erased maps, the geography of oppression. So, if ancient weapons are the red buttons, the world government's real genius move was much quieter. They redrew the map, not just borders, but who's allowed to exist in the middle of the world, and who gets punted to the edges like unwanted DLC. Because as far as geography goes, One Piece is insanely judgmental. Look at where the non-standard races live. Fishmen? Literally shoved under the red line, in the dark, relying on a bubble pipeline controlled by their oppressors. Giants? Remote winter island at the far edge of the New World, wrapped in myth so tight that Elbaf may as well be Narnia with axes. Skypians and Shandians? Kicked into the sky, on islands you can't even reach, without gambling your life on a murder cloud. Lunarians? Hunted relics clinging to the world's highest peaks. It's like the world itself is saying, you can be tall, winged, or fish, but not in the nice neighborhoods. This is the Void Centuries outcome made physical. The victors took the comfortable middle strip, the red-line spine, Maria Joie on top like a smug hat, and the Grand Line trade arteries running around it. Everyone else got pushed into spots that are either hard to reach or hard to rule. Deep sea, sky, blizzards, don't go there or you'll die, zones. It's segregation by terrain type. Here's an interesting thing. When the world government feels threatened, islands don't just get punished, they get erased. God Valley doesn't just fall out of use, it falls off the map. O'Hara doesn't just get a buster call, it gets a tree-shaped war crime and then a total media blackout. Lulucha literally gets deleted by a space laser the moment Sabo looks at the wrong throne. That's not random. That's a cartographic kill switch. And then you have Wano, which looks like a quirky samurai theme park, but is actually a traumatized country that decided, cool, we're just going to wall ourselves off with a vertical ocean and pretend the rest of you don't exist. Their isolation is a defensive adaptation to a global order that keeps making islands vanish. You'd hide too. The Lunarians are the clearest before and after. Once gods of the Red Line, worshipped for their flames, now reduced to a science project race with King as the last major data point. The celestial dragons literally live where Lunarians used to be. That's not subtle. It's a hostile takeover of sacred real estate. And to be fair, the way Lunarians fell is probably the nightmare scenario rattling around in every celestial dragon's tiny brain. What if the world flips again, and they're the ones being hunted in the mountains? Fishman Island is even more of a rigged setup. It's a choke point under the Red Line, mandatory passage for many routes, yet totally dependent on the system that hates it. At the same time, it's sitting on Poseidon's bloodline and the Noah, which is like storing a world reset key under your enemy's house. That tension is why Otoheim's dream and Fisher Tiger's rage both feel so combustible. The place is a pressure cooker by design. Giants get a softer approach. Elbaf's warrior culture's terrifying, so instead of extermination, the government sends Mother Carmel and CP to adopt their orphans and redirect that power. Friendly indoctrination. They don't want another ancient kingdom-tier army picking the wrong side of history. I want to emphasize a mental image here. Imagine the world map, but color-coded by who's allowed to live in the center versus who's pushed to the margins, or the sky, or the seafloor. That's not just aesthetics, that's policy. And if Joy Boy's promised dawn is real, it's not just about beating Imu, it's about literally redrawing that map. Who gets to move where? What happens when the walls and the Red Line itself stop doing their job? That's the next step, inherited will as urban planning for an entirely new world. Joy Boy's failed promise and the coming dawn. So when we talk about inherited will as urban planning, that's not just a cute line. That's basically Joy Boy's LinkedIn bio. The big mistake with Joy Boy is treating him like a guy who wrote one very dramatic apology letter to Fishman Island and then peaced out. The apology on the poneglyph is real, sure, but as far as the story's concerned, that's the symptom, not the disease. What was he apologizing for? Probably not. Sorry I ghosted you, mermaid princess. It reads way more like, sorry I promised you the sun, and then the sky literally stayed broken. Joy Boy's promise looks like a global commitment. Get the persecuted races out from under the Red Line. Fishmen, merfolk, maybe even skyfolk and ancient tribes, and bring everyone together under one unified sea and one actual non-segregated sky. Here's an interesting thing. The Noah is not a cute boat. It is a skyscraper that someone decided should cosplay as a ship. You don't build that to move one princess. You build that to move a population. Pair that with Poseidon, Shirahoshi's power to command sea kings, and you basically have mass migration DLC. Giant sentient sea monsters towing a continent-scale ark? That's not symbolism, that's logistics. And to be fair, it looks like the logistics were ready. The thing that wasn't ready was history. Because whatever Joy Boy's side tried to do, it clearly failed. War lost, betrayal, or some void century backstab. Take your pick. The Sea Kings literally talk about a promise not fulfilled in that time, and a future sovereign they're still waiting on. That's the language of a delayed launch, not a cancelled project. Fishman Island still stuck under 10,000 meters of racism. That's your evidence. So when characters talk about the dawn of the world, we should stop treating it like a motivational poster and more like a patch note. The dawn is a systemic reboot. Tear down the red line and reverse mountain. Unify the 4 C's into one and make the world government's geography-based control system obsolete overnight. All those checkpoints, tariffs, and Grand Line choke points. Gone. Imagine the calm belt when there is no belt. That's what freaks Imu out. And Luffy, beautifully, has no idea. He can't read a poneglyph, he doesn't care about urban planning, and yet he keeps accidentally cosplaying as Joy Boy's design document. Island after island, he liberates people, topples local tyrants, and casually breaks the logic of the system. Reverie wants to debate whether fishmen deserve the surface, to which I say the Sea Kings already voted. Modern events are basically the ghost of Joy Boy heckling the present. Fishman Island still waiting. The Reverie, literally arguing about moving them under the sun. Sea Kings whispering about that day approaching. Even the ancient weapons fit this. Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus aren't just nukes. They're a world-editing toolkit split into ship, bloodline, and sky god. I want to emphasize that the real weapon isn't the blast. It's the plan to make the blasts unnecessary by changing the board itself. Which is why the final war can't just be who wins the big anime punch. The real question is, does the map survive? Does the red line stay? Or does the world literally get rewritten in real time? And because as far as timing goes, we're already watching the 3 great powers collapse, next we need to talk about how that political implosion sets the stage for a full-scale planetary remodel. From Void Century to Final Saga, the story's hidden spine. So when we say 2 world orders, we're not just being dramatic. We're literally talking about a 3-hour road trip where every pit stop was secretly a history lecture. East Blue, that's remedial class. We meet Luffy, yes, but we also meet the D-initial, corrupt Marines, and the basic idea that justice is already a mess. It's the control group. This is what the world government looks like before we start peeling the wallpaper off. Alabasta is where the syllabus goes crazy. On the surface, it's just Sand Warlord does coup, to which I say, sure, but also Crocodile is hunting Pluton, an ancient weapon blueprint is hiding with Iceberg, and the Nefertari line is the one founding family that refused to move to Maria Joie. Local problem, global implication. You thought you were watching a desert arc. You were actually auditing ancient weapons 101. Skypiea looks like filler heaven, and to be fair, a lot of us treated it like that on first watch. But here's an interesting thing. Mantra as proto-hockey, sky races tied to the moon, a giant poneglyph literally signed by Gold D. Roger, and a city of gold built on tech that feels suspiciously ancient kingdom adjacent. Enel is not just a lightning man, he's a case study in what happens when someone stumbles onto old power with zero context. Water 7 and Eni's lobby upgrade the pattern. Frankie's backstory quietly parks the Pluton blueprints in our lap, while CP9 and the Buster Call show us judicial overreach as a weapon. Nico Robin stops being the archaeology lady and becomes the last living bridge to the Void Century. Again, local rescue mission, global implication. One woman's execution is worth an island's annihilation because she might say one forbidden name. Thriller Bark looks like Halloween filler, but it sneaks in Moria's connection to Kaido and the idea that corpses, shadows, and giants are all military assets in a centuries-long arms race. Summit War then rips the curtain down. Whitebeard's speech, the D clan clustering at Marineford, the world government trying to publicly erase an entire era in real time. Dressrosa gives us Doflamingo, the celestial dragon dropout, and an island that forgot its king overnight. Toys, erased memories, a hidden Riku line, and a gladiator arena full of D's Whole Cake Island turns bloodlines and arranged marriages into geopolitical weapons. Wano hardlocks us into Joy Boy, ancient Wano's role as a closed vault, and the idea that the world's very shape was altered after the Void Century. By Egghead, the lore isn't background anymore. It's the plot. Vegapunk, O'Hara's legacy, Imu moving pieces, ancient weapons switching from rumor to active threat. As far as Luffy's education goes, he's not studying history. History is sprinting at him, tripping and dumping its backpack in his lap. Every island he touches becomes a node in this inherited will network. And that's where the D-Clan and the smile at the gallows thing stop being a quirky character trait and start reading like the ancient kingdom's operating system. Radical freedom in the face of guaranteed loss. Roger laughing at Laugh-Tale. Saul laughing at the Buster Call. Luffy grinning on the scaffold in Logtown. It's a ritual, not an accident. I want to emphasize, you've actually been studying this world's history the whole time. Oda just disguised the lectures as clown fights and cake heists. Next, we're going to cash that in and boil this entire hidden syllabus down to a handful of core historical beats so you can walk into the final saga feeling like you've got the real timeline, not just scattered trivia. Condensing 900 years, the essential world history cheat sheet. So let's actually do the impossible. Condense 900 years of redacted history into something you can keep in your head while you're half asleep scrolling TikTok. Here's an interesting thing. If you remember nothing else from this entire video, remember these core beats, because as far as understanding the final saga goes, this is the real syllabus. First, the ancient kingdom. Picture a freedom-obsessed, technologically cracked civilization that treated the whole planet like an open-source project. They were building giant ships like Noah. Sky Islands had record dials. Wano was manufacturing sea stone like it was Tupperware. And someone thought, what if we put instructions for doomsday weapons on indestructible stone? That's your poneglyph network. The 20 kingdoms looked at that, saw a future where they couldn't control anything, and went, absolutely not. They win the war, but the ancient kingdom booby-traps the future with those stones and the blueprints and bloodlines for Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus. Second, the Void Century is not just a gap, it's World War Zero. That's when the 20 kingdoms fuse into the world government, rewrite the calendar, and literally nuke the name of their enemy out of existence. Joy Boy's big promise, an actually unified free sea, loses not just militarily, but ideologically. The New World Order brands that dream as taboo knowledge. You don't just lose, you become a crime scene people get Buster called for mentioning. Third, the post-Void Century Order is a caste system wearing a Justice cosplay. Celestial dragons sit on top as living gods. The Gorosei and Marines are the enforcement arm, and the rest of the world gets chopped into segregated races and islands. Fishman Island shoved under the red line, Wano sealed off, Elbaf isolated, Sky People exiled above the clouds. Ancient weapons are hidden, not destroyed, because the government wants them as both a deterrent and an insurance policy. We control the reset button. Don't try anything cute. Fourth, the three great powers. Early on, you have monsters like Rock's D. Zebek at God Valley, a prototype Yonko era where pirates are basically unlicensed nations. That's so terrifying. The government secretly teams up with Roger and Garp to erase it. Out of that trauma, you eventually get the more stable triangle: world government, Yonko, and the Shichibukai as a compromise patch. And to be fair, it kind of works. Until Marineford, Blackbeard's rise, the abolition of the Shichibukai, and Luffy casually speedrunning Emperor status turn the whole balance of power system into a vague, collapsing mess. Fifth, the Fault Line Islands and races: Fishman Island and Poseidon, Wano and Pluton, O'Hara and the name of the ancient kingdom, Elbaf and the giant's history, Skypiea and the Sky People's records, God Valley and Lulusia as places literally erased from the map. These are recurring collision points where the old Joy Boy world keeps poking holes in Imu's carefully curated timeline. Sixth, boiled down, Joy Boy and inherited will are the idea that you can lose a war and still win the future if your values survive in people, places, and stories. You erase a kingdom. You don't erase a dream. To which I say, that's your mental cheat sheet. Ancient Kingdom versus 20 Kingdoms, Void Century as World War Zero, Cast World with Hidden Weapons, Three Great Powers patch, Fault Line Islands, and the Joy Boy recursion. In the next section, we're going to poke at why Oda built a shonen pirate manga on top of that much political dynamite, and what that means for how we read every goofy gag going forward. Why world history makes One Piece hit harder. So once you see that political dynamite under the floorboards, One Piece kind of stops being fun pirate road trip and starts reading like a very silly documentary about state violence. Suddenly, all those tragic backstories aren't just Oda farming your tears for sales, they're case studies in a 900-year cover-up. Take Robin. On a first watch, O'Hara is already brutal. Child genius, Buster Call, Saul in the ice, the hand-holding walk through the flames. But when you actually plug that into the Void Century timeline, it gets worse. The world government doesn't just nuke one island. They burn the only people on Earth who got close to saying the ancient kingdom's name out loud. Robin's I Want to Live stops being just personal trauma and becomes the scream of the last data point in a centuries-long war on knowledge. That's not a sad backstory. That's a continuity error in the propaganda system trying to survive. And here's an interesting thing. Once you know that, all the race oppression stuff stops feeling random. Fishmen aren't unlucky that humans hate them. Lunarians aren't mysteriously hunted. Buccaneers aren't tragically rare. That's policy. That's what a post-Void Century order looks like when it decides certain bloodlines and certain sky-burning gods are too close to the old world. The celestial dragons keeping fishmen as slaves, the extermination of Lunarians, Kuma's entire life being monetized torture. This is the same playbook that erased God Valley and wiped Lulucha off the map. As far as world-building goes, that's terrifyingly consistent. Now plug Luffy into that. People like to say, he's just a guy who wants meat and freedom, to which I say, yes, and that's exactly what makes him historically dangerous, because as far as the world is concerned, every time he casually punts a tyrant into orbit, Arlong, Crocodile, Doflamingo, Kaido, he's doing unauthorized revisions to the history curriculum. Arlong Park becomes not just Nami's liberation, but a tiny correction to centuries of fishman abuse. Alabasta isn't just saving Vivi. It's stopping a world government warlord from staging a false flag to rewrite a kingdom story. Dressrosa and Wano are literal Joy Boy patch notes, fixed an issue where toys and samurai were removed from the record. I want to emphasize how much this retroactively powers up scenes you already love. The O'Hara flashback, the Reverie discussions, Emu deleting Luluzia. These aren't disconnected shock moments. They're modern echoes of the same ancient fear, that the truth about the old world, the ancient weapons, the red line, will leak. When Emu stabs Vivi's photo and the country disappears, that's the void century in real time. And to be fair, the real treasure of One Piece might just be that trick. It takes a goofy rubber pirate story and quietly turns it into a meditation on who gets to write history and who gets erased from it. Joy Boy's will, inherited will, all that grand talk? That's just Oda's way of asking who gets the pen next. So here's your homework. Rewatch Skypiea, Fishman Island, Dressrosa, Wano with this world history lens on. Suddenly, Enel's fairy tale about the moon, Otohaime's signatures, the toys under Dressrosa, the closed borders of Wano all click as artifacts of World War Zero fallout. You will probably notice details you literally skimmed past before. And stick around, because next we're going to zoom in on how specific characters, especially the Straw Hats, accidentally become historians, whether they want that job or not. Till the end, your turn to sail. How to explore One Piece history. Yourself. So let's weaponize that feeling of, wait, how did I miss this for a decade, and actually hand you a shovel? Because as far as One Piece history goes, Oda has already drawn the treasure map. We're just the clowns who forgot to bring a pen. First assignment? Make your own timeline. Literally. Open a doc, grab a notebook, draw on your wall like a conspiracy theorist, whatever. Start with the big anchors we do know. Void Century, Fall of the Ancient Kingdom, Founding of the World Government, God Valley, O'Hara, the current year 1524 calendar. Then, as you read or re-watch, start pinning arcs and flashbacks onto it. Where does Skypiea's Shandora War sit relative to Fishman Island's Noah legend? When exactly did the Nefertari family bail on becoming celestial dragons? The goal isn't to be right. The goal is to see the mess. Here's an interesting thing. The history is usually hiding in the background, not in the big speeches. So start watching like a paranoid archivist. Pay attention to Buster calls, the way the flag burns at O'Hara versus Eni's lobby, the specific world government symbols on ships and at the Reverie. Listen for race-specific slurs toward fishmen, giants, lunarians, buccaneers. Those little nasty words are fossilized propaganda. Anytime an old guy, a librarian, or a drunk ex-pirate starts a sentence with "back in my day," your history alarm should be blaring. If you want history hotspots, we can actually be very specific. Revisit the O'Hara flashback in Robin's story, Skypiea's Golden Bell and the Shandora ruins, Fishman Island's royal family scenes with Otohime and the Noah, the Reverie discussions about abolishing the Shichibukai and the Nefertari line, and then the recent Egghead info dumps about the ancient robot and that certain mysterious figure on the empty throne. Watch those with your timeline open. Pause, take notes. Yes, we're turning your fun pirate anime into homework, to which I say, welcome to the club. Also, start treating propaganda as a puzzle. Compare what the world government says happened, like O'Hara was researching weapons, or Luluzia never existed, with what we actually see. Look at wanted posters, newspaper headlines, and Morgan's extremely biased editorial choices. When the news calls something terrorism, ask, terrorism to whom? When Emu erases an island from the map, ask, what did they just delete from the history books? I want to emphasize, half the fun is arguing. What did Joy Boy really plan? Is Uranus a weapon, a sky-based system, or the world's off switch? How will the seas and the red line physically change? Drop your pet theory in the comments and fight politely. As a loose framework, expect future answers to cluster around 4 pillars: the ancient weapons, the structure of the world itself, Emu's identity, and the true nature of the D clan. If you build your notes around those, you'll be ready when Oda starts rapid-firing reveals. Interactive homework. Comment the one historical mystery you most want answered. And stick around, because next we're zooming back into the Straw Hats themselves and how these idiots keep tripping over world-shaking secrets like it's their day job. Closing the book, for now. The dawn is a history lesson. So where does that leave us after 3 hours of treating a goofy pirate manga like it's your final exam in anime archaeology? It leaves us with the one contrarian idea this whole mess has been circling. One Piece is not about finding a treasure chest. It's about forcing an entire planet to sit down, shut up, and confront the history it buried. People say, it's just Luffy chasing gold and meat. To which I say, cool, enjoy your surface-level reading while the rest of us are over here watching a 900-year conspiracy thriller play out under the jokes. Because as far as the actual plot engine goes, the real One Piece is a complete uncensored record of what the world government did to win. Here's an interesting thing. Joy Boy, the Ancient Kingdom, and the Void Century aren't just lore flavor. They're the first draft of a freer world. That calendar reset to year 1524, that's not bookkeeping, that's censorship. O'Hara got vaporized for reconstructing literally a single name. Fishman Island's Noah, Wano's closed borders, the Red Line itself. All of that screams, we remodeled the planet to erase the previous layout. The Ancient Kingdom tried version 1.0 of global freedom, lost, and the victors shredded the manuscript. And now we're watching the messy second attempt. Every new arc from here on out is basically a history exam for the world government. Alabasta, Enies Lobby, Dressrosa, O'Hara, God Valley, Lulucia. Every time a forgotten island or race or weapon shows up, the question is the same. Can their official story survive contact with the receipts? And to be fair, they've been curve grading hard with Buster Calls and Oops, Island Gone. I want to emphasize this. The dawn of the world is not just a pretty sunrise shot where everyone hugs it out. It's a spotlight. Once the Void Century is common knowledge, nobody gets to pretend they didn't know. The celestial dragons, the kings who played along, the marines who looked away, even the revolutionaries who hesitated. Everybody has to pick a side with full awareness. Joy Boy isn't just one guy. He's the recurring moment where the world runs out of excuses. So, if you made it this far, congrats! You are now officially a history major of the Grand Line. You're going to start catching the way Oda uses a throwaway line about a calendar, or a weird Sky Island ruin, or a My Ancestor Met Joy Boy anecdote as hard evidence in this giant, slow-burn court case against the world government. If you want to keep doing that with us, hit subscribe, drop a like, and share this with that one friend who swears One Piece is just a goofy pirate show. Because as far as world building goes, it's a 900-year cover-up with punchlines. Comment your favorite buried clue. Send this to your crew and stick around for the next deep dive. And when the series finally ends, the greatest treasure we'll walk away with won't be the gold at Laugh Tale. It'll be the full, uncensored history of its world, the real One Piece we've been chasing since Chapter 1.